Loot is busy checking his loot, counting out 2 jolt weeds and some puke berries. He looks pretty happy with how his herb collection is coming along. The guy is actually having a blast just sitting there. He mentions that sorting through his items is basically therapy for him, but not everyone is enjoying the wait. From off-screen, some guy starts complaining about how long they have to sit around while Loot sorts through what he calls trash. Lord Creed stands there with his group, looking annoyed. He watches Loot work and realizes that getting a move on isn't happening anytime soon. Creed starts venting about how this is typical villager behavior. He's already frustrated because he thinks Loot is breaking the rules by holding them up, but Loot tries to defend himself. He tells the group it's not actually trash and says if they sell these items, they'll get a way bigger reward. In this world, a villager with no skills is basically just a servant and treated worse than garbage. Creed dismisses him, saying the quest reward is already more than enough for such a simple job. He tells Loot that a lowly villager shouldn't be messing with their pace. Loot doesn't even fight back, he just figures this kind of talk is part of his everyday life. The girl in the nun outfit tries to play nice, telling Lord Creed he shouldn't be so mean. She turns to Theta and asks for a little backup on that, but Theta doesn't say anything at all. Seeing that no one is really on his side, Loot just shuts down and lets out a sigh as he accepts his situation. Loot looks over at Theta, but she just turns away with a frustrated look on her face. He can't help but let out a long sigh as he realizes how much things have changed lately. While he touches his old plant book, he remembers when it was just him and Theta adventuring together. Back then they actually had fun, but now she feels like a total stranger. Looking out at the city, Loot thinks the problems really started once the guild recommended they join this elite group. He figures it's just how things go in an S-rank party, especially since he's the only one there without any special powers. Suddenly, Theta steps forward and offers to help him out, which completely catches Loot off guard. But before she can even move, Lord Creed reaches out and grabs her arm to stop her. Creed acts all high and mighty, telling Theta that a great mage like her shouldn't be doing dirty work for a lowly villager. He keeps going, reminding her that she's a chosen one with a powerful gift from God. Looking at the situation through his fingers, it's clear that someone is finally hitting their limit with all this nonsense. Creed finally snaps and tells Noin that a talentless villager is nothing but dead weight to an elite party. He makes it official by kicking him out of the group effective immediately. Creed doesn't even blink, giving a smug thumbs up as he tells Noin to get lost right this second, leaving the kid completely stunned. Noin panics and reminds him they're currently on the 4th floor of a dangerous dungeon. He thinks there's no way Creed is actually being serious about leaving him here. Creed just shrugs his shoulders and says they don't give a damn about the danger. He leans in with a mean look and says it's about time Noin lightens their load by disappearing. The party's nun looks all worried with flowers around her, but she's actually being a total jerk. She tells Creed that if he leaves Noin here, the guy is definitely going to die. Creed agrees while the nun points out the path back is probably swarming with monsters by now. Noin just stands there realizing this saint is actually a cold-hearted person, and he's 100% dead. Theta looks down, clearly feeling bad, and tries to speak up by saying she'll go with him, but Creed instantly grabs her arm to stop her, asking if she's really taking pity on a loser like Noin. He leans in close to her and whispers that hanging around with mere villagers is only going to lower her own value as an adventurer. Creed keeps digging the knife in, telling Theta she's special and nothing like that loser, while Theta just stands there shaking. He doesn't give her a choice and starts dragging her away, telling her it's time to get moving and leave. The nun girl gives a cheerful shout while Creed waves a final goodbye, telling the villager he's sure they'll never meet again. Noin collapses on the floor in total disbelief, admitting out loud that he knows he's nothing but a burden to them. He stammers to himself while reality finally sinks in. They really did just leave him behind to die in the dark. Noin struggles to keep walking with his heavy pack, thinking he might as well just toss his gear since he's just a villager. He feels his way along the cold stone walls, cursing the fact that it's way too dark without magic, realizing he took the party's light for granted. Things go from bad to worse when he loses his footing, stumbling over something small in the middle of the path. He picks up the item and sees it's just some junk from Nekomi, crying because the thing doesn't even glow to help him see. Noin just sighs at himself, wondering why he's still picking up random items, even when his life is basically over. Loot stares down the path, worrying that monsters are going to be waiting for him just around the corner, and he really isn't ready to deal with any of that. But then, a giant bird made of light shows up right behind him. He recognizes the spell immediately as Theta's crimson magic, calling it out by name as he realizes the firebird is right there, and a huge wave of relief hits him because he honestly thought he was done for. Loot wonders if Theta saved him on purpose, especially since the bird lights up the whole place and keeps all the monsters away, but then he shakes it off, thinking she probably just didn't want the guilt of him dying on her conscience. He keeps moving, telling himself that giving up is basically just a side effect of feeling sorry for himself. Lute starts feeling better and tells the bird he's trusting it to lead him straight to the exit, but then the bird suddenly veers off, making Lute yell that it's going the completely wrong way, and he starts chasing after it, screaming for it to wait because it's heading deeper into the dungeon instead of out. Lute starts second-guessing everything, wondering if Theta actually used that firebird spell to lure him into a trap, but he doesn't have much time to think before the bird takes off, forcing him to yell for it to come back as he starts sprinting again, realizing he can't afford to lose his only light source just because he's getting paranoid. He knows he's got no choice but to follow it deeper into the dark, so he keeps his eyes locked on the glowing bird until it finally stops near a pillar, leaving Lute completely out of breath and leaning over to catch his wind. He looks up and sees something that stops him dead in his tracks, feeling totally blindsided by the sight of someone lying right there on the cold stone floor, just beneath where the bird is hovering. It's a little kid. Lute can't even wrap his head around it, seeing a tiny body just slumped over in a place like this. And he keeps staring, trying to figure out how on earth a child could have survived getting this far into a dungeon. He wonders if they were ditched or if they just wandered in, but he quickly pushes the thoughts aside and scoops the kid up, knowing they just need to get out of there fast. Lute keeps running and notices the firebird is actually leading him straight toward the exit this time, and he starts to wonder if the bird led him here specifically to rescue the kid, who just looks up at him and makes a small sound. He's completely out of breath, but he tells himself there's no time to overthink the situation as he keeps moving, focusing entirely on the child in his arms, who suddenly lets out a giant, sleepy yawn. The little girl reaches up and pats Lute's face with her tiny hands, making a cute noise. Lute totally loses it over how adorable she is, feeling all the stress and tension from the dungeon just melt away, because it's clear she isn't scared of him at all, putting her full trust in him while he looks on in surprise. He gives her a little smile and promises he'll make it out of this place alive just to keep her safe. And then, a weird system message pops up out of nowhere, announcing he's unlocked an extreme growth skill. Lute stops in his tracks and looks around, asking what that noise was and wondering if his mind is just playing tricks on him. Lute notices the patterns on the stone pillars and realizes they finally made it to the second floor, but he knows they only got this far because of the firebird's help, keeping a steady pace as he suddenly stops and looks up, wondering what that weird presence is right before a loud cry rings out through the hall. Lute starts to freak out, saying it can't be real while a massive high orc suddenly steps out from behind the pillars, catching him totally off guard. Lute starts shaking and looking around for an exit, desperately asking himself what they should do since it's clear this monster is way too strong for the firebird to scare off. He finally gets why the bird was acting so weird, and looking at the size of the orc, he starts to think they're actually about to die right here. But then he pulls the kid close and gets this look on his face, deciding he's just going to have to fight. So he sets the girl down and tells the firebird to look after her while he gets ready to face the orc. Noin looks down at his weapon with a heavy expression, realizing he doesn't really have a choice but to fight, so he pulls his axe out of its cover, telling himself that he's the only one here who can actually do anything about this. He lets the leather sheath drop to the floor, standing his ground because he knows he has to protect the kid no matter what, and looking straight at the monster, he makes up his mind that dying here just isn't an option. But then a weird system window pops up right in front of him, saying he just picked up a new skill called Inspiration, and before he can even process that, another one shows up telling him he's now got intermediate axe mastery. The windows keep coming, next telling him he's gained a slight advantage against enemies that are stronger than him, until finally a notification for a skill called Last Stand appears while he's staring down the massive orc. Noin starts to freak out, wondering why he's seeing these hallucinations again at the worst possible time, but he doesn't have long to think because the orc roars and lunges at him, leaving him screaming as it attacks. Noin puts everything he has into a massive downward swing with his axe, but he stops and looks at the blade in total shock, asking why it just stopped cutting. He can't believe what he's seeing, thinking the whole thing has to be some kind of lie, especially since the orc is still up and roaring right in his face. He admits he has no clue what's going on, but he knows he can't stop now, so he puts his back into another swing, yelling for the axe to just cut through one more time. The blade connects perfectly this time, slicing right through the monster's neck and dropping the beast for good. Noin finally lets out a long, shaky sigh of relief just as a new notification pops up telling him he's learned intermediate axe defense. He just stands there looking at the massive body on the ground, barely able to say that he actually won. Over to the side, the little girl starts jumping for joy and cheering while the firebird lets out a relieved breath. Noin drops to his knees with a tired laugh, asking the kid if she's really that happy for him. With the fight finally over, he gathers himself and walks out of the dark dungeon entrance back into the open air. Noin steps out and looks up at the bright sky, finally leaving the darkness of the cave behind, walking out into the grass, while he shouts that they finally made it out alive. He looks at the firebird and gives it a sincere thank you, telling the spirit it really saved his life back there. But it's time to part ways, so he waves goodbye and asks the bird to give Sheeta his best wishes. He knows the bird fought just as hard as he did, but he also realizes it's draining Sheeta's magic every second it stays out. And as he keeps moving forward, he tells himself that he can't keep being a burden to her anymore. It's a pretty sad way to say goodbye, but he's determined to make it on his own, especially when the little girl starts laughing and making cute noises that brighten the whole mood. Noin can't get over how cute she is, but he still wonders how a kid like her ended up all alone in such a dangerous place. And as they walk down the long path, he can't help but wonder if she was actually abandoned. The little girl starts laughing and playing around, and Noin looks down at her, asking what their next move should be since they're out in the middle of nowhere. He asks her if she'd be down to just live a quiet life with him in the countryside for a while. Luckily, a guy in a horse-drawn wagon pulls up and asks if they're heading toward Bit Village. Noin starts to answer, and ends up thanking the guy for being cool enough to give them a ride. While they're sitting in the back, Noin mentions that the place is just a remote, backwater village and asks if the driver is really okay with stopping there. The driver tells him not to even sweat it, because there was no way he was going to ignore a guy traveling with a little kid plus. He explains that when his carriage broke down before, the people from that village really stepped up and gave him food and supplies to fix it, so he's happy to help. Noin looks out over the horizon and realizes they're finally getting close, pointing out that it looks like the village is right there. The wagon keeps rolling down the dirt path, and it turns out Bit Village is only a little bit further away. Noin watches the driver handle the horses and can't help but think about how nice the guy actually is. The driver lets Noin know that the village is right on the other side of the mountain pass. Noin looks out at the stars, wondering to himself if everyone back home is doing okay after all this time. Up ahead, the familiar sight of the old stone windmill comes into view against the sky. The little girl looks out from the back of the wagon and tells Noin that they've finally made it. Noin holds her close and points toward the landmark, telling her that's the Bit Village windmill right there. As they get ready to hop off, the driver waves goodbye and yells out to Noin one last time. Noin catches something the guy tosses his way, realizing with a bit of a shock that it's a bunch of apples. The driver tells him to take them as a thank you for the stories and to give his best to the villagers as the wagon rolls away. Noin stands there taking it all in. He's finally back home in Bit Village, and he mentions how refreshing the air feels. Suddenly a voice from the fields yells out that Big Brother Noin is home, and he just stands there with a huge smile. The village boy starts firing off questions, asking what happened to the big adventure and where Sheeta is. The kids wonder if he just forgot something at home, or if he's planning to head right back out. Noin just gives them a plain smile and admits he actually got kicked out of the adventuring party, leaving the village girl in tears, crying about how that group must be absolutely horrible for doing that. The village boy gets worked up too, yelling about how they have some nerve making fun of Noin like that. Noin just rubs the back of his head and apologizes for only bringing back pathetic stories instead of cool souvenirs. But the kids aren't having it. The boy tells him he's still their hero even if he's a dropout, and the girl cheers that Noin is still super amazing. Though they quickly shift gears to ask about the kid, the boy starts blushing and gets a bit nosy, asking if the little girl is actually Noin and Sheeta's kid. Noin awkwardly explains he was just forced to take her, while the kids imagine Sheeta acting like they're from different worlds. The flashback shows Sheeta looking back one last time, coldly telling Noin to take care of the baby before leaving, and Noin knows Sheeta has changed and gotten way colder, but he's still grateful she saved both him and the little girl. He laughs a bit while telling the kids he actually found the baby inside a dungeon, which leads to the village girl looking totally depressed on top of a sheep, bummed out because Sheeta and Noin used to be inseparable. Noin explains that being an adult means everyone has their own quest to follow, you just can't stay together forever. But the village boy cheers up fast, shouting about how happy he is to finally have a new little sister. Noin finally announces he's home and tells the kids they're the best, though they're too busy crying to accept the compliment. The boy suddenly gets curious and leans in, asking Noin what the little girl's name is. Noin looks at her and realizes he needs a name, admitting he's actually been putting some thought into it. Looking at how round and plump her hands and cheeks are, he decides to name her Marulu because it sounds cute. Noin asks the little girl if he can call her Marulu from now on, and she lets out a happy cheer like she totally understands him. But as soon as he says it, a weird voice in his head announces that a naming contract is official. He starts to lose it, wondering why those crazy hallucinations are back again, while Marulu just keeps giggling. The voices keep going, telling him his stats have been boosted like crazy by some high-level blessings, making him panic even more since he seems to be the only person hearing these things. The village boy thinks Noin just really loves the new name, while someone else in the back wonders if he got possessed by a spirit in the dungeon, so Noin tries to pull himself together. He decides the best move is to head over and introduce Marulu to the village chief. Meanwhile, the chief is knocked out in bed, dreaming about how nice heaven looks and talking in his sleep about going there soon. He finally wakes up with a start, realizing he was just having a weird dream. At that same moment, Noin walks up to the chief's house with Marulu on his shoulders, shouting out to let him know they've arrived. Marulu starts tugging on his hair while they walk, and Noin just laughs and tells her that it actually hurts a bit. The door swings open as the village chief shouts out a warm welcome for Noin, but the old man stumbles out looking incredibly weak and shaky. He asks if Noin has been doing well, which makes Noin panic because the chief looks like he's about to drop. Just as Noin asks what's wrong, the chief completely loses his balance and starts to fall over. Noin catches him and tells him he needs to sit down right away. While the chief explains he's been feeling pretty sick lately, he leans on the bench and tells Noin he's sorry for the trouble, still looking totally out of it. The chief realizes he should be serving tea, but Noin stops him immediately and says he'll handle the pouring himself. Noin heads inside and calls out that he's putting the tea in the usual spot, leaving the chief to just sit there and apologize for being so tired. Once everything is set, Noin tells him the tea is ready, and the chief gives him a quiet thanks. The three of them sit together on the bench outside, and Noin mentions it's been a really long time since he's had a cup of the local tea. As they relax, the chief finally looks over and asks who the little girl sitting with them actually is. Marulu smiles brightly as she introduces herself to the village chief, and the old man remembers how Noin left the village to adventure with Theta, making Noin look pretty awkward. He just stares at his drink and says that a lot happened since then, but Noin finally just comes out with it. He rubs his head and admits he got kicked out of his party. The chief gives a weak little laugh and says that sounds like a real streak of bad luck. Noin changes the subject and looks down at his mug, asking the chief if this tea is actually old. The chief isn't surprised he noticed, admitting that it really should have been the new harvest by now. He starts shaking a bit while looking down, admitting that the village is in a tough spot. The chief asks Noin if he'd go check out the field, which leaves Noin sounding pretty confused. As the old man struggles to stand, Noin offers to carry him, but the chief tells him he doesn't need any pity. Noin stands there holding Marulu while the chief just stares. He's totally caught off guard by the kid. They head out to the fields and Noin asks if all the tea terraces are in this kind of shape. The chief tells him he's right. Noin wonders how things got this bad. Marulu makes some noise while the chief explains that nothing has grown for months. The old man starts groaning, admitting he hoped Noin could figure out the cause since he's the expert on plants, but Noin gets distracted when he sees Marulu starting to move, so he yells out her name and tells her not to wander off too far from them, but she's already on the move. Marulu just keeps running and playing, so the chief tells Noin she'll be fine since the village is pretty small. Noin gets to work checking the dead crops. He can tell right away that pests aren't the problem, which means something else is wrong. Even though the weather was actually good this year, the soil is still completely dried out. The chief starts shaking as the reality hits him. He realizes the plants won't be growing any fruit at all. The chief starts shaking as he hears the bad news. Noin tells him the rot is so deep that the crops are basically dead. The old man completely loses it and clutches his face while Noin watches him freak out. He drops his staff and collapses. The chief groans that he's got nothing left to say, while Noin just stands there looking at him like this is way too much. Noin points out that the guy's soul is literally starting to leave his body. He tells him he needs to pull himself together. The chief starts acting like he's passing away and tells Noon to take care, but Noin just begs him to stay with them. Looking totally out of it, the chief starts mumbling about a dream he had just last night, and in the dream, he's sitting at his desk surrounded by papers. He's stressing because the ruined crops mean they can't pay taxes. Suddenly, a lady with a halo appears in his vision, and the old guy is so tired he starts running toward her. She tells him to come to heaven where there aren't any taxes to worry about, and he's totally sold on the idea. But his soul starts floating out of his mouth for real. Noin has to grab the ghost and tell him he's not allowed to die yet. Noin tries to steady the village chief, who's completely panicking about the ruined crops. The old man is spiraling because the tax deadline is coming up and he's got no way to pay. Looking down at the dirt, it's clear the situation is a mess. The tomatoes are rotting right on the vine and things are looking pretty grim for the village. While the guys are stressing out, Marulu is having the time of her life. She's just running through the fields, cheering and playing like nothing is wrong. Noin and the chief stop to watch her hop over the crop rows. Noin finally asks her what she's even doing since she's just bouncing around the dead plants. The sun starts to go down over the village. It's quiet as smoke drifts up from the chimney of the chief's small house, and inside Noin finally gets the chief tucked into bed. He shows up with a bag of food as the old man thanks him for carrying him home. Noin sets down a heavy pile of fresh produce, telling the chief he's actually the one who feels bad for taking so much from them lately. The chief tells him it's really no big deal, so Noin suggests he at least share some of the food with Marulu, who's standing right there smiling. Marulu reaches out and starts patting the chief's head while he lies in bed. He says just having her around is enough to make his heart feel a lot better. Noin heads for the door to give them some space, calling out to the mayor that he'll be back to check on things tomorrow. Noin waves goodbye to the village chief, telling Marulu it's time to head out as they step away from the house, and he scoops her up into his arms. He's got his massive pack on, but he just smiles and tells her let's go, so they start making their way back. He tells her they're finally heading home, and she just makes a cute little sound in response as they walk down the path past the village windmill. Noin realizes that this whole plan of living a quiet, peaceful life is turning out to be a lot harder than he thought, but they eventually make it to his small house in the woods. As they get to the front door, someone inside starts yelling about being poked, which is when Noin looks at the little girl and smiles. He tells Marulu that from this day on, this place is officially her new home. He opens the door and welcomes her inside. Marulu doesn't hesitate for a second. She lets out a happy scream and starts running all over the place. Noin starts putting his heavy gear away, telling her he's going to get some food started and asking her to just wait a bit while he gets to work at the table. He starts sorting through the bags he brought back, wondering to himself if the kid is going to be a picky eater or not. He picks up a large shell and sighs. He knows he needs to hit the town tomorrow to trade these items for cash, even though it probably won't be enough to cover the village's land tax. Noin lets out a big sigh and says that all things considered, he's just really glad they made it back in one piece. Meanwhile, Marulu is just having the time of her life running around, and later that night, everything is quiet under the crescent moon while the two of them are fast asleep in bed. But the next morning, Marulu is already up and fixing her hair ribbon, looking like she's in a great move as suddenly someone starts hammering on the front door. A voice from outside yells that it's a disaster and tells Noon that things are looking terrible, which gets Noin out of bed. He heads to the door holding Marulu and finds the village chief pointing frantically toward the farm, yelling for them to look because the fields have completely come back to life. Everything is bright green and sparkling, and it's clear that Noin and Marulu are both totally stunned. He can barely get his words out, just staring at the crops and saying it's actually true, while the village chief drops to his knees, crying his eyes out and saying this whole thing is a miracle. Noin is standing there wondering what on earth could have caused this, but the chief is too busy celebrating the miracle to notice, so Noin goes out to check the plants himself. He picks up a perfect tomato and realizes it's not just that the root rot is gone, the actual soil has been totally transformed. Noin looks over the crops and says it's actually true. The field looks amazing and the village chief tells him the soil is totally different from yesterday. The gross smell is finally gone, so the old man starts shoveling dirt into his mouth. Noin loses it, but the chief just yells that the soil doesn't even taste bitter anymore, and he scoffs at the idea of a farmer just looking at the dirt to judge it when they should be tasting it instead. Noin makes it clear he is not interested in eating dirt, but the chief just laughs and tells him not to worry while Noin realizes the old man has been eating this stuff the whole time to check the quality, which the chief admits is exactly what he did. But he's starting to look a little pale as he suddenly collapses right in the middle of the field. Noin runs over, asking if he's actually serious right now, but the chief tells Noon to forgive him because he's pretty sure he's dying after eating all that soil. And Noin just stands there with Marulu, reminding him that dirt is full of bugs and weird stuff. He can't believe the old man actually ate it. The village chief is stuck in bed, worrying about his crops and admitting he never thought eating dirt would actually make him this sick. So he looks over at Noin with a pale face and says he thinks the Reaper is finally coming for him. The old man tells Noin he's leaving the village in his hands, making Noin ask why he's being so dramatic and giving up already, but the chief just keeps going, saying his dream must have been a sign and that Noin is the only one left to look after everyone. Noin stands there in total shock as a system message pops up saying the chief has died and that Noin just gained a bunch of political power. But the old man isn't actually gone yet. He starts talking about how lonely he's been since his wife died and how it's time to see her again. He lets out a weak breath and says his very last wish is to eat some bit dark gat one more time. The chief says he's sorry for everything, so Noin holds his hand and promises to go make him some pit porridge right away. While he heads to the kitchen, Noin realizes the village is so poor they can't even afford a doctor, so he wants to at least do this much, and Marulu just watches him with a sad look, giving a tiny nod as they both deal with the heavy mood in the room. Noin is in the kitchen getting everything ready when he realizes Marulu wants to help out too. He tells her she's being super kind and watches as she starts stirring the pot while making cute little noises. He tells her she's doing a great job, and as the porridge thickens up, he mentions how he's sure the chief is going to be really happy to finally eat this. Once it's all done, Noin brings the finished pit porridge over to the bed. The old man thanks him, but Noin makes sure to mention that Marulu did a lot of the work too. The chief takes a bite and starts crying, saying it's so delicious he can't even believe it. But then he suddenly freezes up, making Noin worry that something might be wrong. Right then, a system message flashes out of nowhere saying a huge status growth skill has been unlocked. Noin recognizes the voice and looks totally confused while the chief suddenly turns into a giant wall of muscle. Noin just stands there screaming, unable to believe his eyes. The village chief stands up looking completely jacked. He says the pit porridge made him feel light as a feather, making Noin ask who this guy even is while Noin looks at the empty bowl and wonders what's actually going on with Marulu. The chief sits on the bed with his arms crossed, admitting that even he thinks this whole thing is way too weird. Marulu is just cheering in the corner, and Noin can't help but agree that it's all making no sense. As the chief looks at Marulu, he tells Noin that this whole string of miracles might actually have a reason behind it. He suggests that Marulu might be the one who caused all of this to happen. Noin just stands there looking confused, not sure what to think about it. The chief starts crushing fruit into a bucket with his bare hands like it's nothing. Noin asks Marulu if her juice is good, and she's clearly loving every second of it. Noin watches the chief work, pointing out that the way he's squeezing that fruit is a little much. The chief asks if Noin wants a glass for himself, but Noin decides to just pass and stay with his tea while noticing how the mayor has already settled into his new muscular body like it's the most natural thing in the world. The chief tells him it's more than just settling in. Ever since he transformed, he's been feeling like he's got way too much power to handle. The chief flexes his new muscles and mentions his physical condition is doing great. It's like he's a whole new man. They watch Marulu enjoy her meal on the bed, and she looks up with a huge smile to say she couldn't be more grateful for everything. The chief gets a serious look on his face and asks Noin if he heard that mysterious voice too. Noin is caught off guard, asking the mayor if he actually heard the same voice. It's clear neither of them expected the other to know. The chief points out a legendary saying about how the voice is a sign of a blessing from the world tree, and he goes on to explain that this specific voice is known for bringing about actual miracles. Noin just sits there looking a bit clueless, wondering if this is all just some old legend the chief is talking about. When the chief asks if he's even heard of the world tree, Noin flips through his plant books and admits he only knows what's in his guides. The chief brings up the world tree religion, but Noin just laughs it off, saying his home village is too far out of the loop for news. The chief thinks it's weird since Noin traveled so much as an adventurer, but Noin just sighs. He was treated like a slave back then and never had the time to learn anything. The chief tells Noin to just forget about the small stuff for a second, because the most important thing here is that mysterious voice. Marulu chugs her drink and mentions that her entire body felt different the very moment she heard that voice speak to her, and the chief starts losing it. He shouts that what happened was a straight-up miracle, and he's never felt better in his life. He gets a serious look and explains that, in his view, a miracle is just another way of describing what people call growth. Noin just stands there holding his cup with a blank stare, wondering what the chief is even talking about. As the light starts to glow, the chief explains that Noin is being given a special ability that awakens once it's finally unlocked. Suddenly, a system message confirms it's finally open. Noin has officially unlocked an extra skill called Limitless Growth, which makes him think back to the moment he managed to kill that high orc back in the dungeon. He sits there on the floor with his axe, thinking that maybe that monster was just a weak one after all. Noin always assumed that he only won that fight because he got lucky, but things are starting to look a lot different now. Noin stares at his hands in total shock, wondering if it's actually true. He asks himself if he really has a special ability of his own now, and he just laughs it off, telling the chief there's no way that's possible while the old man just stands there looking like a beast. The chief suddenly gets right in his face, making Noin yell in surprise. Then the old man asks if he wants to head into the forest for a bit. Noin jumps up from his seat, making sure not to wake up Marulu while she sleeps on the floor. He asks why they have to go to the forest, so the chief looks out toward the small house in the woods and explains that there's just something he really wants to try out. Noin sneaks out the front door as quietly as he can, saying they need to move fast while Marulu is still asleep. The chief just grunts. As they start walking, the chief holds onto a massive wooden staff. He mentions he only grabbed the thing out of habit, but then he stops and touches his ear with a weird look in his eyes. He tells Noin that he just heard a voice speak to him, even though Noin is standing right there and didn't hear a thing. He asks the chief what the voice actually said, and the chief explains that the voice told him he got 2 new skills, specifically throwing and shoulder strength enhancement. The chief mentions he's heard of the throwing skill before and asks Noin to tell him more as they walk through the woods. They eventually reach a spot where the chief stops and points toward a giant tree sitting right in front of them. He explains that there's a stream further down, But this massive tree is completely blocking the way and makes things hard for everyone. Noin says he's aware of the problem and knows there's a detour, but it takes way too long to go around. The chief suddenly suggests that Noin should just cut the tree down, but Noin loses it and says doing that is totally impossible. Noin starts geeking out over technical stuff like how deep an axe notch would need to be, but the chief tells him he has it all wrong. The old man gets a scary look in his eyes and tells Noin he wants him to just slice the whole thing in two. Noin tells him to stop joking, but the chief stays serious and says they're only out here to test his real power. Noin is surprised to hear they're actually testing his abilities, and the chief confirms that's exactly what's happening. The chief reminds him that he's the guy who killed the high orc, even though Noin keeps trying to say it was just a fluke. The village chief hands Noin an axe, telling him to give it a shot to see if that orc kill was really just a fluke. Noin looks at the tool and figures since the old man is pushing so hard, he might as well try stepping up to the massive tree. Noin reminds himself that he's not supposed to have any special abilities. He decides to keep the swing nice and easy so he doesn't end up hurting his wrist, and then he takes a breath and starts his countdown, swinging the axe through the air with a quick 1-2 motion that slices through the giant trunk like paper, sending the top of the tree flying as the chief lets out a massive shout. Noin can't even process what just happened, looking completely confused while he stares down at the axe in his hands. He's totally stunned, barely able to whisper that there's no way he just did that. Just then, a glowing system window pops up right in front of him. It announces that he's officially acquired a mid-tier logging skill, which freaks Noin out so much he asks the chief if he heard that weird voice too. The old man just looks at him like he's crazy, saying he didn't hear anything at all, leaving Noin to realize that he's the only one who can hear the skill announcement. He starts wondering what that voice actually is and why it's only talking to him, but the chief just starts flexing, looking all proud of himself. He asks Noin if he finally sees the truth now that he's shown off that kind of power. The old man explains that they've actually been given a blessing from the world tree. Noin stands there holding the axe, realizing the chief wasn't kidding about any of this. The village chief gets a really serious look on his face, muttering that this whole situation is actually looking pretty bad, and Noin looks down, agreeing that having these kinds of powers is going to be a huge problem. The chief explains that the Lord of Pit Village is basically just a greedy guy who only cares about money, and Noin knows he's right. He warns that if the wrong people find out about their abilities, they'll be used like old rags just to squeeze every bit of tax money out of them. So the old man tells Noin that this has to stay a total secret between just the two of them, which leaves Noin pretty shocked. The chief suggests they should start heading back to the village, and Noin quickly agrees to follow him. As they walk, the chief turns back and says there's something else they need to talk about regarding little Marulu, mentioning that he isn't 100% sure yet, but he's got a theory that makes Noin jump. He looks at the sleeping girl and wonders if Marulu is actually the spirit princess, a thought that completely blows Noin's mind. The chief explains that according to the old legends of the World Tree religion, the spirit princess is the one who brings blessings to the world. The chief mentions how Noin didn't seem to know much about it, but the World Tree religion is basically everywhere. And it's actually pretty rare for anyone to be clueless about the group that protects the tree, since it's the source of all good luck. Noin is totally losing his mind at the idea, saying there's just no way Marulu could actually be the spirit princess. But the chief reminds him that ever since Marulu showed up, miracles have been happening non-stop, and Noin has to admit he's right. The old man points out that Noin has been getting the most out of it, receiving constant blessings just by staying near her, which makes Noin think back to how they spent the whole day just running around and playing with a ball. He remembers how he somehow learned massive skills and reached level 10,000 just from playing, and it honestly makes him want to cry. Noin realizes that when he looks at it from that perspective, the chief's theory actually starts to make some sense. Then the chief goes even further, suggesting she might even be the world tree itself, leaving Noin completely stunned. The two of them just stand there shaking in total shock, both of them telling themselves there's no way that's possible. The chief plays it off with a wink and some sparkles. He tells Noin to just ignore him since it's all just an old man's rambling anyway. Noin isn't having any of it though, yelling that he just wants a peaceful life with Marulu and they should definitely say no to that whole spirit princess idea. He keeps going as they walk away, saying he has no interest in putting the kid on a pedestal. He just wants to watch over her like a normal child. While Marulu is back home smiling and thanking the chief for his kindness, the scene shifts deep underground to the World Tree Church headquarters where a mysterious woman in white robes walks toward a massive, ornate stone door. Noin's memories of the chief offering him a field to grow vegetables still linger as the woman sets down a glowing cup and kneels. She looks focused as she reaches out and presses her hand against the center of the giant door. Something hidden behind the door clearly freaks her out, and she realizes she has to go report this to the archbishop right away. Upstairs, a messenger kneels before the tall archbishop, handing over a bunch of new letters that just arrived from the neighboring nobles. The old man just chuckles to himself while looking at the mail. He wonders if it's another demand or maybe just a desperate plea from them. He gets told he should probably give those hopeless people some kind of answer, but he just scoffs and walks off, not caring at all. The archbishop notices how the crowds around the world tree just keep growing, never seems to be an end to it. He laughs to himself while showing off his rings, thinking that a person's natural talent is the only thing that really matters in this world. Suddenly, the woman from the basement runs into the room. She's screaming for the archbishop, who just wants to know why she's making such a scene. She leans in close and whispers right into his ear, and whatever she says makes the old man freeze up and groan. The news is heavy. She tells him the world tree is actually dying. The archbishop can't believe his ears, asking if this is really the reincarnation sign that only happens every few hundred years. He gets serious and immediately gathers a group of his hooded followers in the main hall. One of the subordinates looks up from a kneel and asks if the archbishop called for them. The old man looks totally stressed as he announces that the great migration for the tree's reincarnation has finally begun. He stands there with his arms wide, reminding everyone that the world tree is the source of all their wealth and power. The archbishop gives his followers a direct order to find the reincarnated person and bring them back to him without anyone knowing. He looks totally desperate as he adds that he's willing to pay whatever price is necessary to make it happen. The followers shout that they'll do exactly as he says, and then they all take off to start the hunt immediately. Back at the village, the young boy is lying around wondering where that giant tree flew off to after Noon cut it down. Just then, Marulu pops up in the window with a shout, which catches Noin and the spirit chief off guard. Noin walks over and picks her up, telling her he's sorry for leaving her all alone to watch the house while he was out. He just stands there holding the little girl for a second, and she looks right back at him. Noin mentions to the chief that he still has a hard time believing she's actually some kind of spirit princess. The spirit chief just laughs the whole thing off, leaving Noin to wonder if the village chief was just talking nonsense. But he decides to just roll with it for now, while Marulu makes a happy little sound in his arms. The village chief suggests they go check out the field he's giving to Noin once they finish eating. Noin is totally down for it. But when they get there, he realizes the ground is just a giant swamp. He asks the mayor what he was even trying to grow in all this mud, looking down at his feet sinking into the sludge. He realizes he's going to have to fix the soil from the ground up to make it usable. The chief stands there on one leg looking pretty embarrassed and apologizes to Noin for the mess, explaining that he tried to grow lotus roots and failed. And even after draining the water, the field stayed a total wreck. Noin just laughs it off and says it's no big deal since tilling the land will be worth the effort anyway. He gets a fun idea to pass the time and asks Marulu if she wants to make some mud balls with him. The little girl just looks up at him with a confused little noise, not really sure what he means. Noin shows her how it's done, sitting right in the dirt and holding up a round ball to show her it's actually pretty cool. He starts explaining the secret technique, telling her you have to polish the ball with fine sand to get it just right. Noin keeps working the mud between his palms, carefully smoothing out the shape, while Marulu plays nearby. The village chief watches them from behind and mentions that Noin seems way too focused on what he's doing. Finally, Noin holds up the finished product with a huge grin and tells Marulu to check out what he made, but he suddenly realizes he's been at it for way too long. The chief points out he's been messing with that single mud ball for over an hour, leaving Noin laughing awkwardly about how he just couldn't help himself. The old man points over at Marulu, who looks like she's just bored out of her mind, explaining that Noin has been obsessed with making these things ever since he was just a little kid. Noin doesn't seem to care and just keeps bragging about how amazing and shiny the mud ball turned out. Marulu starts cheering when she sees it, and Noin figures she likes it because she's used to playing alone since her parents went missing, when suddenly, a system message pops up. He actually earned a unique skill called Mud Ball Master, though he realizes immediately that this power-up is completely useless. The chief watches as Marulu starts aggressively making her own, noting that it looks like she was actually inspired by Noin's work. The chief watches the two of them and tells Noin he's finally met his match with Marulu. Marulu shows off what she made, making Noin get all competitive and say he's not going to lose to her. It's a quiet night at the house in the woods where the results are laid out. Marulu's mud balls are a bit messy, but the ones Noin made are perfectly smooth and round. Noin tells Marulu he had a great time playing today. Marulu cheers and shows him how she tried to decorate the mud balls before bed. And as they both start drifting off to sleep, Noin asks if they can play again tomorrow. Somewhere far away, a massive waterfall crashes down a mountainside, and a person in a white cloak stands on the edge of a cliff looking out over the world. The hooded girl looks out toward the horizon and says there's something to the east, sensing a massive amount of mana coming from that direction. A guy standing behind her tells her she's way too motivated considering they don't even know if they'll actually find it. He keeps talking down to her, saying she doesn't even have any useful skills and that he doesn't get why she's even in the 10 shadows. She doesn't let it get to her and just says it's not about if they can find it or not, they just have to find the reincarnated world tree no matter what. The guy in the white cloak stands firmly on the cliffside, saying that the only thing that matters is completing the mission they were given, and he doesn't care what anyone else thinks, calling people idiots if they can't understand why they're doing this. Back near the waterfall, things are a lot more peaceful around the little house. Noin is busy scrubbing clothes in a wooden tub, but he's struggling because the stains just won't come out, feeling the regret of not washing the mud out of their clothes as soon as they finished playing yesterday. While hanging the laundry up to dry, he laughs to himself about how he actually got way more into making those mud balls than Marulu did, and he remembers how much of a workout it was just trying to give the kid a bath earlier. As the clothes sway in the breeze, Noin realizes that he never knew just living a normal life could feel this precious and fun. He finishes hanging the last of the laundry with a smile, thinking that this kind of busy life really isn't so bad after all, but then he stops and looks at her clothes, wondering if there's more to Marulu than meets the eye, like if she could actually be a spirit princess. Noin finishes up the chores by snapping the wet laundry flat and hanging it up, then moves the heavy wash barrel, but as he lifts the massive thing, he's shocked by how easy it feels, realizing he's gotten way stronger without even trying. He looks down at his hand, wondering if Marulu really is the one who gave him all this crazy power. But either way, he knows he has to keep it a secret from everyone but the village chief to keep their peaceful life going. He heads back inside with his gear only to find the room empty, immediately wondering where Marulu disappeared to worrying the kid might have wandered off outside alone, until he spots something on the table that stops him cold. He notices the table is wet and sees that the special mud ball Marulu made is completely gone. Noin stops to think for a second, wondering if the kid just went back out to play in the dirt again, and he just sighs at the wet mess, thinking about how much of a handful the little guy can be. Just as he's standing there, some loud barking starts coming from right outside the window. Noin leans out the window to check on that noise, confirming it's definitely coming from right outside the house. He spots Marulu in the yard and hops right out the window, telling her she can't just go wandering out alone because it's dangerous. The kid is just rolling around in the grass having a blast, while some weird barking sounds start coming from the bushes nearby. Marulu gives this fat, raccoon-looking thing a huge hug and calls it a doggy, leaving Noin totally confused about what the creature actually is. He stands there staring at the round animal, noting that he's never seen anything like it living around these parts before. He puts a hand to his chin and keeps thinking about it, still trying to figure out what kind of monster or animal it could be. But then he notices something else. This little guy is giving off a crazy powerful vibe that actually makes him break a sweat. Just then, a voice behind him remarks on how lively things are, so Noin turns around and tells the village chief he showed up at the perfect time. Noin completely loses it when he sees the old man, because the village chief is casually strolling up while carrying a massive tree trunk over his shoulder. The chief drops the heavy logs with a loud thud, explaining that he wanted to build Noin a little shed near the field he just gave him. The chief asks Noon if he's getting started on leveling the fields today, while Noon just stares at the old man, telling him he's way beyond human for carrying those logs like they're nothing. The chief looks over at the animal Marulu is hugging and asks what that thing is supposed to be, wondering if it's just some kind of weird raccoon. He mentions he's never seen one around here, but it reminds him of an animal an Eastern merchant once told him about, though he can't get over how strange the creature looks. Noon gets a bit nervous and asks the chief if he can feel that crazy mysterious aura coming off the thing, since the vibe it's giving off is definitely not normal. Marulu lets out a little yell when another one of the creatures suddenly pops out from behind the first, giving her a second round animal to play with. The creature actually barks like a dog, which catches them off guard, and the chief looks completely pale as he tells Noon that now there's a second one to deal with. The old man starts thinking it over and wonders if it could be a spirit, especially since it seems so attached to Marulu. Maybe it's even a legendary great spirit. He explains that just seeing one is supposed to bring enough luck for your descendants to thrive, which is a huge deal considering mages spend their whole lives trying to find just one. Noon wonders where these rare things even come from, so the chief asks him if anything weird has been going on with Marulu lately. Noon thinks for a second and says nothing unusual has really happened, even though the evidence is literally standing right there in front of them. Two of Marulu's mud balls start to vanish right off the ground, leaving two more spirits in their place, and Marulu is totally hyped about it. The new ones are a perfect match, and just as weird as the first, so the chief completely loses it. Noin explains they were just mud balls, and the creatures start barking happily while Marulu plays around with them, but Noin tells the chief they need to be smart and keep this whole thing a secret. The chief asks if this is even possible, and Noin just awkwardly agrees with him. The old man says he can hear their peaceful life falling apart and begs Noin to say it's all a dream. They try to move on and go clear the fields, but Marulu starts running wild and they have to tell her to stay out of the dirt. Noin calls Marulu over while holding some small clothes. She looks a bit surprised, but he gets her all strapped into a carrier on his back, telling her she can just relax and watch the birds today. The village chief tells Marulu her new outfit looks great on her, and Noin apologizes for taking so much from the old man. The chief realizes the kid didn't even have clothes before. Marulu shows off the outfit with a big smile, while Noin explains they're just hand-me-downs from the other village kids. Looking at how happy she is, Noin admits he's actually really glad he decided to come back home to the village. Suddenly, the chief remembers the little raccoon spirit and asks Noin what exactly happened to the creature. Noin explains that he told the creature to stay behind hiding under the bed to keep an eye on the house while they're gone. Back at the house, the spirit is actually listening, hiding in the dark and muttering about house-sitting, which Noin says is all thanks to Marulu. The chief asks if he's really planning on keeping that thing at his place, and Noin just sighs, saying it's the only way they can handle it for now. With Marulu safe on his back, Noin finally starts swinging his scythe, getting to work in the fields. Out in the mud, Noin shouts about how good the fresh air feels while Marulu cheers from his back, just soaking in the vibe. He says tilling the fields gives him a real sense of accomplishment, and then Noin points out a bird flying by for Marulu to see, acting like it's a big show for her. He starts thinking about the old days, how being an S-rank adventurer was rough because everyone looked down on him for being a villager. But now he realizes being a regular guy in Pit Village is perfect. He's honestly never had this much fun. Looking out at the empty land, Noin figures if he fills the whole field with his own crops, the villagers will be so happy. Suddenly that weird voice pops up in his head, telling him he just earned a mid-tier farming skill, which leaves him standing there feeling incredibly light, like all his weight just vanished. He decides not to overthink it and just accepts the power-up, yelling that he's gonna clear half the field before the day ends. The village chief catches him in action and gets completely blindsided, asking why Noon is moving at such a crazy speed. Marulu is breathing heavy on his back, while Noin finally starts to feel the fatigue hitting him, admitting he's starting to get tired, but decides he's got enough left in the tank to push himself a little bit further. Noin stands there holding his shovel when a system message pops up, letting him know he just earned a mid-tier stamina boost. He shouts that he's going for one last push while the village chief just stops chopping wood to stare at him. Ark shows up waving a basket, yelling for Noin and saying he brought some fresh berries from his place. Ark takes one look at the field and completely loses it, asking the chief what's going on. He wants to know exactly how long Noin has been out there working like this. The chief tells him he only started a little while ago, which is insane because he's already finished months' worth of work. Ark starts cheering that Noin is the best, while Noin just looks back feeling totally confused. Ark can't believe Noin cleared that whole massive field in less than half a day. Ark is leaning in close, practically vibrating as he asks Noin how he managed to get that kind of insane power, but Noin just sweats, trying to find a way out of the conversation. He lies through his teeth, claiming it's just because he worked really hard during his adventure training. The kid totally buys it, sparkles in his eyes as he shouts about how Noin is the coolest guy he's ever met, and then Ark pumps his fist, declaring he's going to get just as strong as Noin one day. Noin just gives him a shaky smile and wishes him luck. But then Ark rubs his head and says he's actually heading out to start his training right now, which leaves Noin and the chief just staring at him. Ark gets all bashful, looking down with a big grin while he admits that his real dream is to become a hero. He waves goodbye to the chief, Noin, and Marulu, shouting that he'll see them later as he starts walking off to begin his journey. As he leaves, Noin's system starts acting up. A message pops up saying Ark just unlocked a medium status growth skill, which makes Noin completely lose it. The chief is standing there sweating, realizing that Ark actually just heard the voice of the world and he's in total shock. He can't believe the kid just received a blessing like it was nothing. Marulu waves goodbye as Ark heads off, thinking about how the boy is actually a harmless but secret ally to their cause, even if Noin hasn't picked up on it yet. Back at the house nestled in the trees, things are finally quiet, and Noin faceplants onto the bed, totally wiped out, while Marulu just bounces around full of energy. He hears something moving and looks down, seeing those little raccoon spirits peeking from under the bed. Marulu calls them doggies, while Noin asks the little guys if they stayed out of trouble while he was away. He can't help but smile, thinking that they're actually kind of cute when they're just chilling like this. The creatures bark happily when Noin asks if they want something to eat, and then they start swarming his legs in excitement, making him laugh while he tells them to just hold on a second. As he feeds them, Noin realizes they really do just act like normal, everyday animals. Noin sets down 2 bowls of fresh berries and tells the little guys to enjoy the meal. They start eating like crazy, and Noin can't help but smile while he watches them scarf everything down. Everything is quiet at the house in the woods as the day finally comes to an end. But then some weird alerts pop up saying Bit Village just made a contract with an earth sprite, giving everyone in the village special magic skills and new resistances, while the chief just stands there, watching as a huge burst of light shows that the village is going through a massive growth spurt. Somewhere else, the nun girl looks totally caught off guard and asks what that crazy power was just now. But back at the house, the sun comes up and Noin wakes up with a long yawn and a stretch. He's still feeling pretty wiped out though, thinking he might have gone a bit too hard on the farm work yesterday, until he realizes the raccoon spirits are all over him, clearly having taken a huge liking to him. Noin pokes the little raccoon spirit and is surprised at how soft it feels, realizing it's definitely not made of mud. He sits there thinking about how he saw Marulu's mud balls transform into these creatures, but then wonders if he just imagined the whole thing, though he decides it doesn't really matter since they're here now. Just then, the village chief slams the door open and yells at the top of his lungs, asking if Noin is inside. Noin points out the busted door and the chief feels bad about it, apologizing for basically kicking the entrance in. With a spirit sitting on his head, Noin asks the old guy why he's in such a massive panic this early, leading to the chief laughing awkwardly while trying to prop the broken door back into the frame. He suddenly snaps out of it and says he has much bigger things to worry about than a broken door. So Noin asks what he's talking about while the chief tells him to get out into the yard immediately. Noin follows him out and asks if something went wrong, and the chief yells back that something big is definitely happening. Noin looks pretty surprised as the chief suddenly asks him if he can try using some earth magic for a second, which makes Noin wonder if the old guy has finally lost it after all the crazy stuff that's been happening lately. The chief gets all worked up and sweaty, yelling back that he hasn't gone senile just yet, so he squats down and tells Noin to just give it a shot by trying to make a little clump of dirt appear in his hand. Noin looks down at his empty hands and admits he really doesn't think he's capable of doing anything like that, but the chief tells him it's okay, even though Noin has no clue how he's supposed to actually make magic happen. The chief tells him to just visualize the dirt in his palm, so Noin closes his eyes and tries his best to focus, concentrating as hard as he can while repeating the words clod of earth over and over in his head. Suddenly, a piece of dirt actually pops into his hands, leaving Noin totally shocked and wondering why this is happening, while the chief just looks on, saying it's exactly what he suspected as Noin asks what this is all about. The village chief shows off a bit, telling Noin he can actually do it too, which sends Noin into a total state of shock. The effort is way too much for the old guy though, and he collapses on the ground, making Noin yell out his name. Noin looks down at the ground and notices a little raccoon spirit has appeared, realizing that's what came out of the dirt. The chief stares at the creature with a super serious look, calling it an earth sprite. He gets all worked up and asks Noin if he did something to that raccoon, but Noin says he didn't do anything special. Noin mentions the only thing he did was give the little guy some dinner last night, leaving the chief totally speechless. Noin starts to look a bit confused as things start to click, wondering if there's more to the story. He remembers hearing a mysterious voice last night, talking about some kind of contract between the village and these spirits. Noin repeats the name of the village in his head, still trying to wrap his mind around what he heard. The chief explains that the voice mentioned something about enchanting with earth magic, and the proof is right there in his hands. The chief stares at his hands in disbelief, thinking that if he's able to use this power, then everyone else in the village should be able to as well. He looks over at Noin and gets a bit sentimental, mentioning how much he actually loves this quiet, peaceful life they've got going. Noin stammers out that he feels the same way, and as he tries to bring something else up, the chief says he gets where he's coming from. Since things are getting complicated, they both agree to just keep everything a secret like they usually do. Later on, Noin heads back inside with the little raccoon spirit following him, and Marulu is right there waiting for him. Noin sees her sitting up and realizes she's already wide awake, but it's pretty clear she has one thing on her mind. She holds up her empty bowl and starts yelling for Noin, making it known that the doggies are ready for their dinner. Noin looks out the window and realizes the sun is up, so he tells her to hold on a second since it's already breakfast time. The spirits start absolutely inhaling their food, which makes Noin ask if it really tastes that good as he and Marulu watch them. Noin makes a mental note to go thank a luck for the berries soon, and figures he'll share some of their own crops once the fields start producing. Noin looks out at the field he just worked on. The sight is actually pretty incredible, and he can barely believe his eyes since the crops he planted only yesterday are already covered in ripe fruit. It's moving way faster than normal, so he realizes this has to be the result of his contract with the spirits. He and Marulu just stand there in total awe of the power. Noin suggests that since they have such a huge haul, they should probably go share it with the rest of the village. Marulu's all for it. He decides they'll stop by Florence's place specifically, mostly because she was the one who gave Marulu the clothes she's wearing. Noin gets to work picking as many tomatoes as he can, letting out a tired breath once the baskets are finally filled up, and he figures that since Florence has a big family with a ton of kids to feed, they should head over to her house first. As he lifts the heavy baskets, he's shocked by how light they feel, wondering if he's got some kind of new blessing making him stronger. He thinks he's pretty impressive for carrying 30 kilos like it's nothing, while Marulu cheers him on from behind as they start the trek. Noin tells Marulu to stay close and hold on since it's a long walk, so she grabs his leg as they head out. Noin huffs as he lugs the heavy vegetable baskets along the path, with little Marulu following behind, keeping a steady pace. Noin looks down and tells Marulu she's so cute, but mentions that since she's so small, traveling long distances must be tough. He smiles and says if his hands weren't full with all these vegetables, he'd give her a hug or a piggyback ride. But then a system message pops up saying he's acquired the medium item box skill, and Noin freaks out as a bright light takes over. He looks around in total shock, wondering where the baskets went before realizing they just disappeared into thin air. Noin drops to the ground and starts laughing, realizing he heard that voice again, and this is definitely another crazy Grace. He thinks about how he's always been just a regular villager, so all of this is pretty overwhelming to process, while he tells Marulu he has no clue what to do with all these sudden skills, feeling the massive jump from his old life. Noin tries to act natural and tells a surprised Marulu that the vegetable baskets actually just went on ahead of them. He waves his hand and jokingly yells for the baskets to come back, just trying to keep things light for the little girl. The vegetable baskets suddenly pop back into existence right in front of them, catching both of them off guard. Marulu cheers because the food is back, while Noin just stands there sweating, totally weirded out that his plan actually worked. Noin realizes what this means for their walk, and as Marulu jumps around, he decides he'll just send the baskets ahead again so he can help the kid out. He closes his eyes and gives the command for the items to vanish, and just like that, they're gone. Marulu thinks it's a great show, but Noin's just thinking about how crazy simple the skill is to use. Now that his hands are finally empty, Noin tells Marulu to hop on his shoulders for the rest of the trip to Florence's place. As they walk, Noin realizes how handy this power is, but then it hits him that he might get stuck doing everyone's chores. He figures it's best to keep this a secret from the village chief, picturing the old man making him carry giant logs all day long. They finally make it to the house, and Noin calls out to see if Florence is around. The door swings open, and Florence greets him with a big smile, happy to see Noon back at her place. Florence gives them a warm welcome, looking especially happy to see that Marulu came along for the visit as well. Noin holds up the heavy basket and explains he brought some vegetables to say thanks for the clothes, while Marulu just cheers. Florence is thrilled about the gift, mentioning it's a huge help since she has such a big family to feed. She tells them to stop standing around in the doorway and invites them both to come inside the house. As they get settled, Florence says she'll go brew some tea and apologizes for the place being a bit tight, but Noin tells her it's totally fine. He asks if her husband Johan was the one who built it, telling her it's a really lovely home. Florence blushes at the compliment, saying he's just as much of a flatterer as Noon is, but then she remembers she actually has one last slice of berry pie left in the kitchen. She turns to Marulu and asks if the little girl wants it. Marulu's eyes go wide as Florence sets the plate down, telling her to go ahead and enjoy the treat. The little girl is completely stunned by the sparkling pie, letting out a tiny sigh of pure excitement while Noin watches on. Noin tells Florence that he's totally fine with just having some tea, while she apologizes for only having one piece of pie left, explaining that things disappear fast with such a huge family. Marulu is busy enjoying her treat at the table when the village boy suddenly kicks the door open, shouting to his mom that he's finally back home. The kids spot the dessert and lose it. The sister points at her mom and asks if she's been keeping the pie hidden from them this whole time. Before anyone can react, the boy snatches the slice right off the plate and bolts, leaving Marulu staring at her empty hands in total shock. Marulu starts bawling and tells him he's being a huge jerk, but the boy just yells back that it's his now because he was faster. He tells her to stop being a baby and quit crying over some dumb food, but he doesn't realize his mom is standing right behind him. Florence absolutely loses her cool and smacks him, yelling at him to apologize for being so rude after stealing from a guest. As the boy gets scolded, Noin scoops up the crying Marulu and tries his best to comfort her, telling her it's going to be okay. Florence isn't done yet. She holds her hand out and demands that her son gives the pie back right this second. She takes Marulu from Noin and tells her she's a good girl, then makes a ridiculous face to try and cheer her up, which just leaves the little girl looking completely confused. Florence goes all out, making a ridiculous face and sticking her tongue out, making all these weird sounds to get Marulu to stop crying. She keeps switching up the goofy expressions, doing whatever she can to help, and it actually works. Noin tells her he's seriously impressed by her skills, but she just laughs and says having 7 kids will do that to you. While Marulu finally starts smiling again, Florence doesn't let her son off the hook. She makes him apologize to the little girl while he nurses a massive bump on his head. Noin stands back, amazed at how fast she handled the situation. He thinks to himself that he's gotta learn how to do that for later on, but suddenly a system message pops up. He's shocked to see he actually leveled up and gained a new skill called Expert Soother, which makes him lose it. He can't believe a random thought in his head actually made a skill manifest right then and there. He squats down and tries to keep it together, telling himself he really needs to stop getting so worked up over everything involving Marulu, but the peaceful moment ends fast. Florence suddenly collapses on the floor, and Noin rushes over to check on her while her son yells out for his mom. Florence looks totally drained, admitting she's just exhausted and feels bad for being such a mess, but Noin tells her to just focus on resting. Florence is still looking pretty rough, but she tries to force herself up, saying she can't just lie around because she needs to get dinner started. Her kids aren't having it though, and they tell her to stay in bed and rest, begging her not to push herself while they take over the chores. Noin jumps in to back them up, telling Florence he's going to help out too, so she really just needs to lie down and take it easy. She looks at him and calls him Noon, sounding a bit guilty as she asks if she can really count on all of them to handle things, but Noin gets everyone fired up, saying they're going to split the work and do their absolute best, and the kids are totally down for the plan. While everyone is getting ready, Noin looks back at Florence and starts realizing something is up. It seems like something impossible just happened. He thinks back to that system voice and realizes it sounded like 2 voices overlapping at once, but the kids snap him out of it by asking what the first move is. Noin takes charge and tells them they're starting with the cleaning and the laundry, and says he'll head out to the well to fetch all the water they need. As he's lowering the bucket into the well, he can't stop thinking about that sound, and he's pretty sure he didn't mishear it. He remembers the voice saying a status growth skill was unlocked, making him wonder if Florence actually just manifested a skill the same way he did. Noin looks at his reflection in the water bucket and starts wondering why he can hear that weird voice, especially when it's announcing someone else's skill unlocking. He remembers that only the chief could hear the voice back when the village made the deal with the raccoons, and he tries to shake the confusing thoughts off. Since he doesn't actually know anything about how this works, Noin figures there's no point in stressing, so he decides he'll just ask the chief for some advice later. He uses his powers to summon a whole bunch of water buckets at once, making them appear out of thin air right in front of him. One of Florence's daughters catches him off guard and makes him jump. Then she asks if he can help start the stove so she can make some porridge for her mom. Noin tells her he's on it and starts heading inside, while the girl just stands there totally blown away that he managed to bring so much water back. He tells her to go ahead and handle the cleaning while he deals with the fire, and she's totally fine with that. Once she's gone, Noin leans against the stove and lets out a huge sigh of relief, thinking he almost got busted using his abilities in front of her. He starts working on the fire and remembers how his old party used to make him do this all the time, and he really wishes he could make this task easier too. Suddenly, a massive flame erupts from his hands as the system announces he's gained a top-tier kindling skill, and he just smiles, feeling like he's finally getting the hang of things. Noin finishes up at the stove and realizes he accidentally made another wish, so he tells himself he'll have to test it out properly later. Inside the house, one of the kids brings over some porridge for Florence, asking how she's feeling and if she's up for eating. Florence looks a lot better as she sits up in bed, thanking them for the food and saying she's finally feeling okay again. Noin gives the kids a pat on the head and tells Florence it's a huge relief, knowing how happy the little ones will be to hear that news. But then Florence mentions something weird. She tells him she suddenly started hearing voices ringing in her head and it only just stopped. She lets out a long breath and says she feels way lighter now that the noise in her mind has finally gone away. While the kids cheer for their mom, Noin stands there totally shocked because he's now certain that his system announcements are being heard by others. He realizes they need answers fast, so he asks Florence if she can come with him to the chief's place, which immediately makes her worry that something's wrong. Once they get to the chief's house, Florence's voice travels through the woods as she asks what the heck a blessing even is. The chief explains the situation, leaving Florence completely stunned at the idea that Marulu might actually be a spirit princess who took a liking to them. Florence is wide-eyed and sweating as she asks if they're really going to get powers just like the ones mages use, and the chief flexes his muscles, telling her this body is actually the result of that blessing. Florence is totally confused because she thought he just worked out a lot. while Noin stands there feeling pretty awkward. So Noin tries to get some details and asks Florence what the voice in her head actually sounded like, leading Florence to explain how it listed off fire, earth, water, and wind in a non-stop loop. She stops to think for a second and mentions that the voice also said something about mastering light magic as well. Hearing this, the chief completely loses it, saying he's never heard of a single person being able to control all 4 elements, let alone light, which makes Noin realize how crazy this is, since even an S-rank mage like Theta could only ever master one. He tells them that light magic is basically the stuff of legends, supposed to be exclusive to the saint of the World Tree Church. Florence just looks proud of herself, and the chief huddles up in shock, thinking about how this woman is already a total monster when it comes to magic. Noin decides to put it to the test, asking Florence to just imagine water coming out of her hand, but she just laughs and asks what kind of weird stuff he's saying. The village chief gestures toward Florence, he's backing Noin up and asks her to just give it a shot. So Florence laughs it off and says she'll play along with their little game. She throws her hands up and calls for water to come forth. But the moment she says the word, a literal tidal wave blasts out of her hands. It completely wrecks the room and sends the guys flying. The chief is stuck outside the window getting drenched. He yells out that he can't even breathe while Florence stands there in total shock, realizing she just nearly drowned them both. The chief stands there dripping wet and looking exhausted. He tells Florence she better not mention this to anyone else. He gets serious and tells her this has to stay strictly confidential. Florence quickly agrees while Marulu stays tucked in, sleeping through all the chaos. Meanwhile, out in the dark, the hooded girl is still on the move. She can still feel that massive presence nearby, and it hasn't faded at all. She looks toward a bright glow coming from the forest. They've been walking for a while, but she wonders if the source is still deeper in, leading her to keep pushing through the rocky terrain. She reminds herself to stay sharp and move carefully. Deep in the shadows, something is watching. A dark figure sniffs the air and mutters about the smell of a really powerful mana nearby. Inside the quiet room, a single candle flickers on the table as a hand reaches for a cup. It's late, but Noin is still wide awake and drinking, thinking to himself that there's just no way he can calm down right now. He's sweating and looks completely stressed out. He was supposed to just go back to Pit Village and live a simple, quiet life. But everything changed after he became an S-rank party's pet and headed for the World Tree Village. Now Marulu's weird powers have the whole place in a total panic. He thinks back to how the village chief went from looking like he was on his deathbed to suddenly becoming a massive, buff guy. It's totally insane, especially with Marulu making those mud dumplings that actually transform into living raccoons right before his eyes. Noin takes another sip and realizes it's not just the two of them. Even Florence ended up getting a skill without having any clue what was happening. He stares down at his food with a grim look on his face. He's starting to suspect that everyone else in the village might be changing too, and maybe from here on out, every villager is going to start waking up with their own special skills. The thought has him sweating bullets. He knows things are going to get extremely dangerous if he doesn't start learning how these skills actually work. Noin sits back and tries to remember exactly when he started using skills, thinking the very first one he ever unlocked was likely his growth skill. Everything goes back to that day in the dungeon when he first found Marulu and saved her. But before that happened, he had to deal with Lord Creed's ego. The guy told him straight to his face that a villager with no talent is just dead weight before kicking him out of the party. Thinking about it makes Noin slump over on the table. It's a total drag to remember. But it was right after getting dumped that he ran into Marulu. His mind drifts to Theta, and he can't help but wonder what she's up to now, or if she started acting so cold to him because she secretly thought he was useless too. He slams his hands on the table and splashes his drink, telling himself to focus because now isn't the time to get depressed. He's got skills to look into. And the more he thinks about it, the more he realizes getting skills is actually kind of easy. He's pretty sure he got his just by wishing for them. To test his theory, Noin closes his eyes and concentrates as hard as he can on his hands. And just like that, a notification pops up saying he just got the dig hole skill, leaving him pretty shocked at how simple the whole process actually is. Noin hunches over, feeling like an idiot for picking the dig hole skill when he definitely should have thought of something better. It's great for farm work, but that's about it. He leans on his hand by the candlelight, realizing there were actually other times he unlocked skills before this. It hits him that one of those times was back when he was out tilling the fields. He remembers how the farming skill just popped up out of nowhere because he was having such a good time working. And as soon as he told himself to push just a little bit harder, the stamina increase skill appeared right then and there. There was one more time he really stopped to think about what he was doing. He looks at a pot of bubbling stew and realizes it happened right as he was asking Marulu if she liked the food he made her. That was the very first meal he ever put together for the kid. She was so hyped about it that she did a little tada pose before digging in. Noin took a bite himself and thought he might have gone a bit heavy on the flour, so he made a mental note to fix the recipe next time. Just by having that thought, his cooking skill evolved and gained a plus sign. He wonders now if that extra level was always there, or if he really managed to level up his abilities just by caring enough to make a decent meal for Marulu. Noin looks back at how his cooking skill changed. He just wanted to make the food taste better for the kid, and that simple thought was enough to make the skill evolve into something better. Looking at the new rank, he figures that little plus sign means the effect actually gets stronger whenever he takes a second to think about his work and how to improve it. He figures there are 3 main ways his skills trigger. Usually it's just from working way harder than normal, and he really wishes he'd had an ability like this back in the day. But there's still a catch. He realizes the actual rank of the skill he ends up with seems to be completely random, leaving him thinking about Florence and how she uses her high-level elemental magic just for basic housework. He wonders if the power of a skill is actually tied to a person's natural talent. He tells himself to stay focused and quit overthinking things, wondering if he's just making stuff up in his head at this point. Noin sighs as he looks over at the bed. Marulu is completely passed out and sleeping like a log. He gives her a little head pat, thinking maybe she's the one bringing these blessings to the village, even if she doesn't fully understand what's happening. As the candle burns low, he makes a mental note to be low-key with his powers. He's finally got a peaceful life and he doesn't want to ruin it. The next morning starts with a startled Florence comes running in and tells Noon he needs to come outside and see this right now. Florence is super hyped and starts waving her hands around, telling everyone to come check this out because it's amazing. She starts showing off by the fireplace and asks Noon what he thinks, laughing about how magic makes life so easy and convenient. Noon is standing there holding Marulu, looking pretty stressed because he realizes the convenient stuff she's doing is actually top-tier secret magic. She keeps going, bragging about how she doesn't even need the well for water anymore and how it makes her flowers look great, which leaves Noon completely confused while she points out how dark it is and tells him to come over for a second. She explains that her new trick makes cleaning out all the tiny gaps and corners way faster than before. But Noon is internally losing it since he realizes she's using all 4 elements and even rare light magic just to do basic housework. He thinks about how an S-rank mage would probably freak out seeing this kind of power, yet here she is just being a regular housewife. But then he realizes that's just how Florence is. She doesn't care about being powerful and would rather just keep living her life like this, so he calls out her name while she's mid-spell, and she just casually stops to ask him what's on his mind. Noon suggests that using wind magic would make cleaning the house even easier, and Florence just loses it, asking him if he's some kind of genius for thinking of that. The corn in the fields looks perfect, and you can practically smell the pure mana coming off the crops, which catches the attention of something hiding in the woods. A pair of glowing yellow eyes watches the tiny village from the shadows, thinking this place is perfect for whatever they have planned. Meanwhile, the village chief is just casually strolling around looking insanely buff, while carrying a huge pile of greens like he's just a regular old villager. He spots a massive pile of corn and shouts out in surprise, impressed by the fact that it's yet another huge harvest for the season. Noon looks up and wipes some sweat off his face, greeting the chief as he walks through the rows of crops. Noon explains that it doesn't even matter what he plants. Everything in his field just grows and becomes ready to harvest almost instantly, while Marulu cheers nearby. The village chief looks over the field and admits that what's happening here is definitely on a whole different level. But he mentions that while his crops don't grow quite as fast as Noon's, his own field has started growing some top-tier, high-quality stuff lately too. The chief gets down and says they really owe all this success to Marulu, but Noon starts panicking and tells him to stop saying stuff like that. Noin holds Marulu close and tells the chief that she's just herself, no need to make it complicated, and the chief just laughs it off and says he's sorry for getting ahead of himself, while the two of them just look on at Marulu hugging a massive ear of corn. The chief admits that ever since she showed up, every single field in the village has been doing better than ever, so Marulu decides to just go for it and bites right into the raw corn. Noin completely panics, telling her she can't just eat it like that. He quickly takes it away and explains that these aren't like tomatoes and need to be grilled first, leaving Marulu looking pretty disappointed until the chief starts chomping on a raw cob himself. He yells out that it's actually delicious, making Noin wonder why the heck the leader of the village is acting like a kid too. The chief says he just had a gut feeling Marulu was onto something with the way she looked at the corn, and Noin finally gives in and tries a bite. He's shocked to realize it's actually incredibly sweet and totally fine to eat raw, which gives the chief a look of pure greed. He tells Noin they can definitely sell these for a high price, while Noin notes that the old man is clearly just seeing dollar signs at this point. The moment gets interrupted when someone starts yelling for the village chief from the edge of the woods, catching everyone's attention. The village chief looks over and recognizes the girl immediately, asking if that's actually Mimi standing there. Noin realizes she's Ark's childhood friend, while the chief comments on how much she's grown up lately. Mimi looks pretty stressed and asks the group if they've seen her mom anywhere, wondering where she went to find vegetables. She's clearly worried since her mom promised to be back home before noon and still hasn't shown up, so everyone figures she's probably out by the patch of giant butterburs deep in the woods. Just hearing the name of those specific plants gets the group thinking about food, and the chief points out that her mom's stuffed butterbur is a local specialty. Just the thought of it has Noin and the others drooling. Mimi gets a sudden burst of energy and says if there's butterbur picking to be done, she's definitely helping out. The chief yells for her to be careful since they're up by the mountain, but she's already running off toward the forest. Noin watches her go with a smile, and thinks he might head out to grab some of those butterburs for himself later on. The village chief chuckles as Mimi runs off, telling Noin he'll be sure to snag that recipe from her mom for him. He jokes that he'll handle the taste testing himself, but since Noin is such a solid cook, he's definitely invited to join. Deep in the woods, Mimi's mom, Florence, is busy harvesting, thinking about how this year's butterbur is way better than usual. She wipes some sweat off her forehead and realizes she probably went a little overboard with the picking today. Florence starts heading back, knowing Mimi is totally going to give her a hard time for being so late. But suddenly, a massive wolf monster jumps out of the brush with a deafening roar, sending her crashing to the ground. Back near the village, Noin hears the commotion and asks the chief if he heard that, while the chief worries it was Mimi screaming. Mimi finally reaches the clearing and finds her mom unconscious on the dirt with monsters closing in right over her. Ark is trailing behind, completely out of breath, shouting about how the chief and Noin are both moving way too fast. The chief rushes to Mimi's side to check if she's alright, but she just points toward her mom in a total panic. The growling doesn't stop, more of them are showing up, and they just keep coming. The village chief can't believe his eyes, he yells out, asking what a blue wolf is even doing this close to home since Noin mentions the books say blue wolves aren't supposed to attack people. But the chief snaps back that books are just opinions. He points over to Mimi's mom, Florence, who's still out cold on the dirt. The proof that these things are dangerous is right there. Noin looks at Mimi and asks her to take Marulu and go hide somewhere far away, and though she's scared, she agrees. His face gets serious as he tells her to leave everything else to him, and the chief, while Mimi pulls Marulu behind a massive tree to stay out of sight, trying to keep the little girl quiet while they hide. With tears in her eyes, Mimi shouts out to Noin and the chief, begging them to save her mom from the pack. The chief tells Noin they need to focus on saving Florence first, and Noin gives him a quick nod, ready to move in. Noin grips his weapon and faces the pack with a nervous grin, asking the wolves if they'd be cool with just backing down quietly. Looking at the pack of wolves, the situation seems pretty much impossible, but the chief checks on the others and breathes a sigh of relief, glad they're still alive while Noin just stands there in shock. One of the blue wolves lets out a massive roar that shakes the whole forest and hits the two of them with a wall of sound. The chief laughs it off, saying that roar was exactly what he expected and it actually gave him shivers, while Noin admits he's got goosebumps too. The lead wolf is completely thrown off. It doesn't get why its intimidation didn't make these two collapse on the spot. It looks over at Florence and the others, thinking about how easily those humans went down compared to these two. The wolf is losing its mind trying to figure out why its power isn't working, all while Mimi hides behind a tree, totally lost. The chief shouts for Noin to get ready to catch him as he prepares to make a move, and Noin gives him a solid nod. The rest of the wolf pack is starting to get nervous now, wondering who these weird humans actually are, leading to the chief launching himself forward and calling out to Noon as they jump straight into the fight together. The chief doesn't hold back, swinging his massive arm and sending the entire pack of wolves flying with a single shockwave. He drops into a low stance, keeping his guard up while the surrounding wolves start to sweat, realizing they're in trouble. The chief yells for Noin to get ready as he launches himself into the air. Noin shouts back that he's got it, keeping his eyes on the goal. The lead wolf is furious now, screaming about how a mere human would dare to mock its power. It lunges forward with its claws out, and Noin yells for the chief as the beast closes in for the kill. The chief just grunts and meets the attack head-on, catching the wolf with a brutal kick right to the chin that sends it reeling. As the wolf slides across the dirt, the chief stands his ground and asks the beast how it likes a taste of that power. Florence calls out to check if everyone is okay, and Noin gives her a quick thumbs up, telling her he caught Mimi safely. The rest of the pack is completely freaked out, unable to believe this super buff guy is just tossing them around, but Noin looks at the wolves and realizes that even after all that, they're still planning on coming at them. Noin stares down the pack, saying if they don't handle this now, the whole village is in trouble. And the chief just grunts in agreement while Noin looks over at Mimi and mentions how the village usually tries to talk through its problems, asking if that's still the way they do things. But it looks like talking is off the table. The lead wolf's eyes are full of hate, practically screaming for blood. Noin grips his axe, admitting that unlike those high orcs, he doesn't actually want to hurt these wolves if he can help it. He wonders if they can just scare them off. Similar to that time the chief sent a giant tree flying with one hit, and right then the chief says if these things are a threat to their home, they have no choice but to fight, and Noin nods, ready to back him up. The lead wolf loses its mind, calling them pathetic humans and asking how they even have the nerve to stand against the pack. It's go time. The wolves growl and snap their jaws as Noin and the chief lock into combat mode. But before anyone moves, Marulu suddenly runs right into the middle of the mess, standing in front of the huge wolves and yelling at them like they're naughty pets. Noin and the chief both freak out, screaming for Marulu to watch out as she stands her ground against the monsters. The lead wolf is completely caught off guard, wondering what the hell is happening as it realizes a human kid is just wandering around right in front of the pack. The beast starts to growl but stops dead in its tracks. It catches a specific scent coming off Marulu that changes everything. The wolves stare at her in disbelief, wondering if this little girl could actually be that legendary person they've heard stories about. And meanwhile Noin is panicking, yelling for Marulu to get back because that monster is way too dangerous for her to be standing near. But the lead wolf just looks totally defeated, cursing Noin under its breath while the rest of the pack hangs their heads in shame. Noin points out the weird gesture the blue wolf is making, confused by how the whole pack suddenly got so quiet and gentle all of a sudden. He wonders if they're just faking it to trick them, but the chief says it's more than just losing the will to fight. They look like they're in total awe of Marulu, and then one of the massive wolves actually rolls over on its back. Noin knows that showing the belly means no hostility, but he has to remind himself that thing is definitely not a dog. The chief sighs, telling Noin he's way too clueless about the world, and Noin just laughs it off, admitting he knows nothing about the world tree. He explains he was just so into his plant research that he basically ignored every other part of life, like it was just a small oversight. The chief wonders if Marulu got her smarts from her dad, but Noin just yells that they need to hurry up and save her. The chief tells him to hold on, because based on how she's handling things, there might be something special happening here. Noin is totally lost, repeating the idea of special circumstances like it makes no sense, as he asks what the chief even means by that, while Marulu keeps standing her ground against the beast, and the lead wolf just shuts its eyes in pure shame, thinking that this village is completely doomed. The wolf realizes that a place where someone like Marulu lives is off-limits. Meanwhile, Marulu tells Noin to stop being bad, so the lead wolf makes a call and tells the pack they're giving up on this village, leaving the others completely shocked. They yell at their boss about finally finding this spot, but he just tells them they're done, explaining that messing with a place like this is a huge taboo they can't break. The boss wolf stares ahead with a serious look, saying they won't let themselves stoop that low. Noin looks at his axe, thinking that while the whole situation feels pretty sketchy, he's not sure how to proceed. He watches the wolves standing there looking all depressed while Marulu protects them, wondering what their next move should even be. He turns to the village chief and mentions that things are going to be a real pain if they can't actually talk to these guys. Noin lets out a huge sigh, saying that a simple conversation would make this whole process go way faster. And just like that, a notification pops up saying he's learned advanced wolf language. He's completely floored that he just unlocked another random skill. Suddenly, he hears one of the wolves telling their boss that if they keep waiting around, the cubs back home are going to starve. Noin completely freezes up, wondering if he really just heard those monsters talking to each other. It hits him that if he can actually understand what they're saying, then this new skill might be exactly what they need. He tells the village chief that he's going to try and have a word with the pack, which leaves the old man totally shocked. The chief gets all hyped up about Noin having such a handy ability, but Noin just laughs it off, feeling a little. Noin and Marulu stand their ground. The lead wolf watches them closely, wondering what kind of person this kid really is since he's acting so strange. Marulu looks up at Noin with a red face, yelling at him for being such a jerk after the way he handled everything. Noin just gives her a warm smile and reaches out to her, telling her it's okay and trying to calm her down. He gently pats her on the head, which leaves the little girl totally stunned, but over on the other side, the wolves decide to make their move. Seeing them about to bolt, Noin quickly shouts for them to wait up, which stops the entire pack right in their tracks. The wolves are all completely shocked, and one of them wonders if he really just heard a human speak their native tongue. While the village chief pulls Marulu back to a safe distance, Noin nervously asks the pack if his words are actually making any sense to them. The lead wolf loses his mind, barking back and demanding to know how a human bastard like him can speak like a wolf. The whole pack is in an absolute uproar, but Noin just sighs with relief, realizing that his new translation skill is working better than he expected. He takes a friendly pose and asks the wolves if they can explain why they even came to the village, hoping to finally. Noin keeps things chill, asking the wolves if they've got a specific reason for being here. He brings up how they mentioned their kids were starving earlier, which catches one of the wolves off guard. The wolf snaps at his boss, saying there's no point talking to a human and that they should just bail and find another spot. But the rest of the pack is looking for real answers. The leader looks up at the sky, totally stuck on what to do next since they've already messed up big time. He thinks back to how they broke into a powerful being's territory for food and even ended up attacking his servant. He's convinced there's no way they'll be forgiven for that kind of disrespect, and if they try to run now, they'll probably get hit with some crazy divine punishment. He knows their fur is worth a lot to people, and if he doesn't get back to the pack, humans will eventually find them all. He's terrified that hunters will finish them off before they even have a chance to starve to death. Looking back, all he really wanted was to keep his kids safe, but he remembers a hunter aiming right at them. An arrow whistles through the air and takes down a small monster, and just as the hunter walks over to grab the kill, he starts bragging. He's got a huge ego, laughing about how his skills are getting so good that he might be overhunting the area. Ark is growing up way faster than anyone expected. He's laughing to himself, thinking about how Mimi is going to lose it when he shows her what he found. Someone remembers him mentioning that he was heading out to find his mom, who was busy foraging for some wild veggies. Since she's usually over at the giant butterbur patch nearby, he figures he might as well head over there and check it out. He hauls his heavy basket and heads into the woods, determined to give them both a huge surprise. He can't help but grin, thinking about the massive amount of rabbit meat he's carrying. He's already planning the meal, thinking about how they can make a ton of meat-stuffed butterbur together while Mimi takes a quick breather against a tree. Back with the pack, one of the wolves calls out to the leader. The boss is sweating and looks completely stressed out, but he just apologizes and says he was overthinking things, which is when Noin jumps in and asks them to hold on for a minute. The wolf is totally confused, but Noin just smiles and says he pretty much gets the situation now. He's going to go talk to the village chief and see what they can do. The wolf leader just stands there looking completely stressed out, while Noin turns toward the village chief to bring him into the conversation, leaving the old man feeling pretty confused about what's going on. Right then, Marulu looks up with big eyes and asks if she can talk to him for a second. The wolf leader is sweating and shaking, totally convinced that things are over for them. He's staring at the ground, wondering if this is really how it ends for his pack. He starts apologizing to everyone in his head, but then Noin waves his hand and calls out to get their attention. Noin gives them a big thumbs up and a smile, telling them that if a little bit is alright, he's happy to share some of his food. The wolf is completely shocked by the offer. One of the other wolves isn't buying it at all, snarling and yelling that they won't be fooled by humans. The wolf keeps shouting that it's definitely a trap, which catches Noin off guard and makes him jump back a bit. Noin looks pretty nervous now, trying to explain that he would never try to trick them like that. He's just trying to help, but the angry wolf isn't listening. He shows his teeth and yells that he'd rather fall to darkness than ever submit to a human. The boss wolf immediately snaps at him, calling him a fool for saying something so dramatic. The subordinate realizes he messed up and quickly begs his leader for forgiveness. Marulu looks up with a serious face and tells the wolves that the people standing by the village chief aren't the enemy. She's sure that they aren't trying to trick anyone. She stands her ground, promising the pack that there's no way Noin or the others would ever deceive them. The wolves are all sweating and on edge, but then the boss wolf speaks up and says he actually believes in them, which completely shocks his subordinates. He explains that if these humans are under that person's protection, then they definitely have good hearts and can be trusted. Noin finally stops holding his breath and drops to his knees, sighing with relief because he's so glad they managed to get through that mess. But then Ark comes running out from behind the trees. He's all smiles, shouting that he's surprised to see Noin out here, while Noin just sits there looking totally stunned. Ark waves his hand and brags about the massive haul he just got from his hunting practice, not realizing that showing up with a bow and a quiver full of sharp arrows is literally the worst thing he could do right now, especially when he's carrying a basket filled with fresh prey. Noin can only stare at the dead animals, feeling his stomach drop because the wolves immediately get suspicious again. Noin starts panicking as he sees their trust level completely tank, while Ark just stands there wondering what he did wrong. Ark sees Noin slumped over and starts freaking out, yelling to ask what on earth happened to him. Meanwhile, Noin is just completely drained from the stress. He looks up at Ark and asks if he's really that oblivious to the giant wolves standing right there. Ark finally notices them and loses it, pointing his finger wildly while telling Noin to look over at what's behind them. He shouts that there's a blue monster standing right in front of them, but Noin just sighs and tells Ark he's being way too dense. The village chief ignores the panic and calmly asks Ark if he can take the rabbit he caught. Ark says he can have it, but he tries to warn the chief that there's a much bigger problem they should be worried about. The chief doesn't seem bothered at all and hands Noin a basket of food, telling him to go ahead and give it to the pack. He says that if the wolf cubs are hungry, then they need to get this food delivered to them as fast as they can. The chief thinks for a second and realizes the basket isn't enough for a whole pack, so he tells Noin to offer them some grain too. Noin thinks that's a perfect plan and gets fired up to help, leaving Ark in the back still totally confused about what's happening. Noin notices Marulu looking pretty serious and realizes she probably sensed they were in some real trouble, but she snaps out of it and gives him a big smile while calling his name. Noin gives her a thumbs up and tells her everything is going to be just fine. Meanwhile, Ark is losing his mind, pointing at the wolves and demanding to know what the heck is going on. Ark spots Mimi and the old lady resting by some trees and starts panicking even more. Asking if they're okay, Noin just gives him another thumbs up and says they're both totally fine, though he knows he's got a lot of explaining to do. The wolf pack is having their own conversation, with the boss deciding it's time for them to get out of there while they can. Noin ignores the tension and puts his back into it, lifting a huge basket of food for the animals. He drops it right in front of them, which completely catches the wolf boss off guard. Noin just smiles and says he's sorry for startling them earlier, trying to play it cool. Noin offers the wolves a rabbit, telling them to take it if they'd like, while the high orc mentions that Noin went out of his way to hunt it for them. The wolves are totally stunned, staring at the meat and realizing it's packed with a crazy amount of mana. One wolf starts drooling like crazy, but tries to play it cool, warning the boss that this has to be a trap designed to trick them. Noin just keeps smiling while the scent of the fresh meat fills the air, making the wolves more and more hungry. One of the pack members leans in and whispers that the food might even be poisoned, but the boss decides to trust them anyway, telling his pack he'll be the one to eat it first just to be safe. Ark looks like he's finally able to breathe again, while Noin excitedly tells the wolves they can have some grain too if they're still hungry. The wolf boss watches him closely. Realizing that Noin's expression is one of someone who actually cares about their safety, it changes everything he thought he knew about humans being greedy, especially seeing how the others are looking out for Marulu. The boss tries to keep his dignity by yelling at his guys, but they can see he's definitely drooling over the food just as much as they are. The rest of the pack decides that if their chief is okay with it, they're down to just follow his lead, so the wolf boss tells his crew it's time for them to show these humans some proper respect. Right then, all the wolves drop their heads and bow, leaving Noin and Ark standing there totally speechless. The high orc holds Marulu close and says he's sorry for the disrespect of hurting such an important person earlier, which makes the wolf boss freak out, wondering if the little girl is actually some kind of royalty. The group points out how the village chief is basically made of stone, telling everyone not to worry while Marulu laughs. And as Ark cheers about how cool the chief is, the old guy tells them all to get a move on. The wolf boss shouts out his thanks one last time before the whole pack disappears into the woods, heading back toward the village where they finally reach the house, and it feels like they can finally relax. The chief carries a massive plant over his shoulders, asking where he can drop the giant butterbur he brought. Florence thanks the village chief for the help and apologizes for making him carry that massive butterbur plant all the way back to their home, and Mimi joins in too, giving a big smile as she thanks both the chief and Noin for coming to save them. Mimi tells them that if they hadn't shown up when they did, she and her mom would have been in real trouble, which actually catches Noin off guard. So he tells her that if they're going to thank anyone, they should really be thanking Marulu. Mimi's pretty confused by that, but Noin explains how the leader of the Blue Wolves basically took a liking to Marulu for no clear reason. The little girl just makes a tiny howling noise, leaving Mimi and Florence completely stunned that a scary monster would actually be friendly with a kid. They both freak out over the fact that a total miracle happened right in front of them while they were still passed out, and the village chief gets all emotional, saying it's just a case of the wolves opening their hearts to such a pure child. Ark jumps in with a huge grin, adding that giving the wolves all those rabbits he hunted probably didn't hurt either. He gives a confident thumbs up, sure that the whole pack is going to be stoked with a feast like that. Mimi is pretty shocked at how much he caught and asks Ark if he really hunted that many animals, but Ark just laughs it off. He wonders if the wolves can even eat that much, but Mimi isn't having it and yells at him for getting way too carried away again. She asks what he planned to do with all those rabbits if the wolves hadn't shown up, telling him to hunt in moderation because he's taking lives. Ark cries while apologizing, and Noin watches from the side thinking about how obvious it is that the kid is totally whipped. Florence gives a big smile and thanks both the village chief and Noin for all their help, though she's still a bit rattled wondering why a monster would show up in a place like Pit Village of all areas. Noin tries to keep things chill and tells her the creature likely just wandered into the area by chance because it was looking for something to eat. He gives them a big grin and says the monster actually went home happy after he gave it some food, telling them it wasn't even a bad monster and that everything is safe now, which finally lets Florence relax a bit. As they head out, Florence yells after them that she's going to cook up some stuffed butterbur and bring it over as a thank you. Florence yells out that she'll be waiting for them, so Noin waves back and says he'll see her later as they head out. While walking back, Noin asks the chief if he wants to stop by his place for some tea, and the chief says he'd love to. Noin looks out the window and asks if he should boil up some corn too, which the old man thinks is a great idea. The two of them finally make it inside and just slump down at the table, looking completely exhausted from the day. Noin tells the blue wolf that the whole thing was a shock, and the chief admits the village would have been done for normally. Noin says everything turned out okay thanks to Marulu, who's just standing there looking proud of the little creatures she made. He looks at her and thinks about how she doesn't even seem to realize how much she actually helped everyone out today. The chief agrees that she's pretty clueless about her own impact, while Marulu just keeps happily hugging her new plushy friends. Noin starts getting things ready in the kitchen and wonders if those blue wolves are finally getting a good meal. The chief says they gave them a massive pile of corn, so he's sure the pack is somewhere happily chowing down. The village chief is bragging about his harvest, saying the corn from his field is so good you can eat it raw. Noin walks through the house with a steaming bowl, joking that the wolves might like the snack so much they'll come back for more. Just then, a wolf's head pops right into the window, making Noin jump and yell out in surprise because the blue wolf is actually standing there, awkwardly apologizing for dropping by the house again. Noin and the chief both lose it and start screaming when they realize the pack really did come back. Noin is shaking and asks the wolf what's going on, and it turns out the wolf is just there because their boss really wanted to thank Noin personally for everything. Noin is totally shocked to hear that the whole group is actually waiting around in his backyard. Outside, the entire pack is sitting there quietly, and the leader tells Noin that they consider him a savior. Noin stands there looking tiny in front of the massive wolves, wondering if the entire pack really showed up just to say thanks. The blue wolf leader looks down almost shyly, apologizing for showing up so unannounced and dragging Noin outside again, but he insists that the pack just couldn't leave without properly saying thanks for everything. Noin tries to brush it off, telling the massive wolves that they really don't need to thank him since in his village, helping anyone who's struggling is just a normal thing people do. The smaller wolves chime in saying they can't just ignore a favor like that, and the leader explains that Noin stepped in right when they were about to fall into darkness, which sends Noin into a loop of confusion as he tries to figure out what falling into darkness even means. Noin asks if it's a big deal for monsters to go dark like that, but the wolf leader quickly shuts that idea down. The wolf gets a bit intense, yelling out that they aren't actually demons, they're spirits, and there's a huge difference. He explains that they're part of the spirit race, born directly from the mana that the world tree creates, while the actual monsters that go around hurting people are part of the demon race, which are born from gross miasma. He admits that humans usually just lump every creature together as a monster or a demon, even though they're completely separate types of beings. Noin is totally blown away by the lesson, and he immediately starts wondering where the high orcs from the dungeon fit into all of this. The wolf leader gets a bit confused for a second, asking if by dungeon, Noin actually means the deep hole, which is what they call it, and he goes on to explain that the creatures living down there and attacking people are real demons, while spirit folk like his pack usually just stay away from humans entirely. He admits that while Noin and his friends are okay, most bad, humans just look at spirits like they're nothing but expensive loot, and Noin can't even argue because he knows it's true. The wolf's face gets serious as he explains that if spirits ever killed humans or ate their flesh, they would end up turning into demons too. That's the real meaning behind falling to darkness, a terrifying change that Noin can barely wrap his head around as the wolf describes how, once they fall, they're just driven by this insane urge to hunt for the blood and flesh of any living creature. They completely lose their minds, throwing away their pride and everything they are, sometimes even getting so far gone they start eating their own kind. The whole pack stands there, acknowledging that Noin is the one who stepped in and saved every single one of them from that dark ending, so the leader looks Noin right in the eye, telling him straight up that the pack is determined to repay the debt they owe him. Noin starts feeling a bit awkward about the whole thing, trying to tell them they really don't have to worry about paying him back. Noin watches as Marulu and the little lagoons dance around. She's having a total blast and lets out a loud bark just to match the vibe. Noin calls out to her, mentioning that the raccoons and the others showed up too, while he tries to keep her from falling over. He realizes that in her head the big blue wolves and the small raccoons are all just doggies, which is pretty funny. But then Marulu suddenly bolts off, making Noin shout for her to wait up as she runs toward the rest of the pack. The entire group of wolves lets out a massive synchronized howl that echoes through the trees, making the whole situation feel way more intense. The wolf leader gets right in Noin's face, shouting and asking if there's anything at all they can do to help out. Noin picks up Marulu and tells the village chief he's going to go talk it over with them, leaving the old man looking pretty confused. The chief asks what they even came here for in the first place, so Noin huddles up with him to explain the debt. The chief says the village is usually a peaceful spot, so it's fine. But the wolves aren't having it. They bark back that they can't just sit around doing nothing after everything Noin did. Noin looks over at the village chief and notices the old man is still totally stressed out. So he mentions that it doesn't seem like he's going to calm down anytime soon, leaving the chief to whisper that he's completely blanking on what to do and suggests they just try some small talk to distract everyone. Noin thinks that's probably their best bet and nervously asks the pack if they actually got enough to eat, admitting he was worried the corn wouldn't be enough since they didn't have much meat to go around. But the wolves immediately bark back and tell him he's got it all wrong. They all start howling at once to get their point across, explaining that the corn from this village is actually loaded with incredible mana. They say it was way better than they expected, and that every single one of them is completely full, especially since their main diet is actually the mana inside what they eat. It turns out they aren't strictly carnivores at all, which is news to Noin. He stands there with Marulu and the chief, totally surprised by the idea that these wolves are literally eating the energy out of the crops, while the wolf explains that the mana acts like a direct power source for them. He points out the food and says it's more about the magic than the taste, and tells Noin that this kind of stuff is basically what keeps the entire spirit race alive. But then the mood shifts as the whole pack starts getting really emotional. They start crying and begging Noin to let them do something to help out, insisting that they have to find a way to repay their debt to him. The village chief is acting so weird that it basically speaks for itself, and Noin can only stand there looking totally drained by the whole scene, while he suddenly gets a spark of inspiration. A look of total realization hits his face as he shouts out that he's finally figured out a solution, and he suggests to the group that they should all just form an alliance. He looks pretty confident about it, even though the little wolf behind him has no idea what he's talking about. But the chief thinks it's a brilliant idea and starts laughing with pure relief. He claps his hands together and tells Noin they are definitely going with that plan. Noin calls out to the pack and asks if they can all just promise to help each other out whenever things get rough. The wolves are caught off guard and he explains that humans call this an alliance, then asks if they're down to form a mutual aid pact with the village. He reaches out his hand to show he's serious, and the lead wolf stays quiet for a second, looking real intense as he thinks about the offer. He mumbles the word alliance to himself, and then the wolf barks out that the Blue Wolf clan officially accepts the deal. The whole pack gathers behind him to show they're all in on the agreement, so Noin pumps his fists and shouts the good news over to the village chief. The old man is stoked and says it's absolutely wonderful that they're all on the same side now, leaving the chief to lose his mind with joy. He starts doing a goofy victory dance with some fans, laughing and shouting that the whole problem is finally solved. The village chief is still going wild with his victory dance while a system message pops up, announcing that Bit Village and the Blue Wolf Pack have officially formed a protection pact, and the chief suddenly freezes up as another notification hits. Turns out the entire village just got a massive boost to their agility stats. Noin sees the old man stop dead in his tracks and asks him what's going on, since he looks like he just saw a ghost, and the chief just drops to his knees and grovels in the dirt, muttering that he's gone and done it again while calling out to Noin. He realizes that if he heard the system voice, it means everyone in the village just got a new skill, something Noin is starting to realize is becoming a regular problem. While Noin asks what the skill actually is this time, and the chief explains that basically, everyone in town is suddenly a whole lot faster. Noin is already dreading the chaos this is going to cause. But the chief points out that just like last time, nobody else seems to have even realized they changed. So the old man thinks about testing out his new speed right then and there. But Noin shuts that idea down immediately before things get even weirder. The lead wolf leans in close, looking pretty confused by the way they're acting, and asks if there's some kind of problem, so Noin just laughs it off and tells the wolf that everything is fine. The chief is just so stoked about the alliance that he couldn't stop himself from dancing. The Blue Wolf leader gets a look at the chief's goofy celebration and says he's glad the villagers are so happy about the pact, and he promises Noin that if the village ever gets into a mess, the whole pack will be there in a heartbeat to back them up. Noin tells them he'll do his best to help out too, but they've gotta remember he's just a regular villager with his own limits, which immediately kills the mood. The chief asks Noin what's wrong and tells him he's giving off a major gloomy loner vibe. Noin just sits there drawing in the dirt while the wolf leader repeats the phrase, villager level, like he can't believe what he's hearing. So the wolf asks him again if he's serious about his level being low, while Noin just mopes and says he's feeling down about his weak abilities. The chief stands there looking completely done with the conversation, thinking to himself that Noin has no clue how strong he really is, But Marulu isn't bothered by the mood at all and starts barking happily while she reaches up to play with the wolf leader's face. The giant wolf freezes up as the kid keeps yapping at him, making Noin realize that the legendary pack leader actually looks pretty stressed out, and Noin quickly scoops her up to give the wolves some space, while the chief realizes the wolves are actually terrified of the little girl. Noin calls the little lagoon spirits over to join the group, but the blue wolf leader just stares down at the small creatures with a confused look. The little guys walk right up to the massive wolf's face, catching a familiar scent that stops them in their tracks. The wolf leader suddenly realizes these little raccoons are actually spirits too, and he's shocked the villagers managed to team up with them first. He looks at the lagoons with total respect, thanking their legendary seniors for being so brave while standing right next to someone as scary as Marulu. The vibe shifts instantly when the chief hears something weird and looks up, while the rest of the wolves start acting restless, and the whole pack suddenly loses it and starts running for their lives, leaving the leader yelling after them to find out what's wrong. Everyone looks up to see a massive dark vortex spinning in the sky. Something huge is definitely about to happen. Noin grips Marulu tight while staring at the clouds, yelling out to ask what that thing is, while the chief just stands there completely frozen. A giant wyvern breaks through the clouds and looms over the area, making Noin wonder why a monster like that would ever show up in Pit Village. The wolf leader starts sweating and looks pretty guilty, admitting to the guys that this whole mess might actually be his pack's fault. The wolf leader looks up in total shock, wondering if the beast followed them all this way. He recognizes it as the same wyvern that attacked their forest home, and suddenly one of his pack members runs up yelling that something is wrong with the water at their favorite watering hole. The leader looks over at the sparkling pond, asking the scout what happened and why everyone is acting so weird. He lets out a groan when he gets closer, seeing that the water has been completely tainted by some kind of dark energy. It's a faint scent, but it smells just like the demons from the deep abyss, leaving the leader wondering why this is even happening to them. So he tells the pack they can't drink from here anymore and they'll have to find another spot. But that's not the only problem. Another wolf runs over yelling that all the local animals are fleeing the forest in a panic, catching the leader totally off guard. Small creatures scramble everywhere while he tries to figure out what could be trashing the forest. Like this dark smoke starts swirling around him and he winces, realizing that the gross smell in the air is actually miasma, and as a giant wyvern circles above the clouds, he can't help but wonder why a monster that huge would show up in this area. A wolf scout runs up to his leader, panicking as he reports that a whole bunch of demons are swarming their position, and the leader realizes they're outmatched and yells for everyone to run, because they're officially abandoning the forest. Before he turns to Noin with a serious look, warning him that those things are real demons and he needs to get out of there now. Noin clutches Marulu tight, feeling guilty because he thinks bringing her to this village put all these people in danger. But the village chief calls out to him, and they both look up to see that massive wyvern still circling in the clouds. A giant eye stares down from the sky while the chief asks Noin if he's seen Marulu, catching the kid totally off guard. Noin points out that the beast is just staring right at them, making the chief wonder if they aren't the primary targets. So the chief notices Marulu is terrified, and Noin realizes she's probably sensing the insane amount of danger they're in. Looking down at her, Noin figures out she must have some kind of hidden power that makes monsters want to hunt her down. So he wonders how they even got tracked, while the chief starts losing it, asking if the girl is just giving off a signal to every monster nearby. Noin is pretty shocked, asking if Marulu actually understands what they're saying, but the wolf leader tells him it's obvious, and even the chief says he guessed as much from the way she acts. The wolf explains that everything stems from the scent of mana she's giving off. Her blessing made the village's mana so rich and sweet that the smell is carrying for miles. And if those creatures in the sky are real demons, they can see the true nature behind that scent, leaving Noin to repeat those words as he tries to wrap his head around the danger. The wolf leader even admits that the only reason his own pack ended up here in the first place was because they were lured in by that same mana scent. Suddenly, Ark's voice cuts through the tension as he screams for the mayor and Noin barely has time to answer before the kid comes charging in with his bow, panicking and yelling that monsters have already made it into the village. He's completely out of breath, telling them that everyone back home is terrified and begging the chief to tell them what to do while the other guys collapse from exhaustion. Ark drops to his knees, explaining that he did his best to make everyone stay inside their houses, but it's clear the situation is spinning out of control. Noin looks down at the kid, asking if they really came all the way out here into the woods just to find the chief and bring him back. Just then, Ark looks up and loses it, screaming that there's a monster right in front of them too as he finally notices the giant wolf standing next to Noin. Noin quickly tries to calm the kid down, explaining that the giant wolf is actually a friend and not an enemy, But Ark is still standing there completely stunned by the news. Ark tries to play it off and gives a thumbs up, telling the other villagers that the whole pack is actually made of good wolves. Though the guys behind him are still sweating and terrified, the kid just nods along with his own logic, but one of the villagers loses it and yells back, demanding to know what he even means by "you guys" in a situation like this. Suddenly, the shadow of a massive wyvern circles over the village, and Ark panics, asking Noin what he and the rest of the villagers are supposed to do to survive. Ark is literally shaking in his boots. He just can't wrap his head around how a monster that huge ended up showing up in a place like Pit Village. Noin holds Marulu close as she starts to cry, realizing that the beast in the sky didn't just wander here, it's definitely hunting for her. Ark freaks out when he hears that, wondering if the monster is actually trying to kidnap Marulu just because she's so cute, and Noin just gives a kind of awkward answer, saying maybe that's the reason while the little girl keeps sobbing in his arms. But then Ark gets a burst of courage, telling Noin they can't let her get taken and that they have to step up and defeat the monster, which catches Noin totally off guard. Looking down at the terrified girl, Noin gives her a small smile and tells Marulu everything is going to be okay and to stop crying. Marulu looks up at him with wide, teary eyes, and Noin holds her close, promising he'll keep her safe no matter what. Ark pumps his fist in the air, suddenly acting all tough while telling Noin that he's counting on him to look after the girl and the rest of the village. But then the village chief suddenly rips his shirt off and flexes his massive muscles, yelling that he's going to be the one to take the monster down, which leaves Noin and Ark completely speechless. Noin is totally losing it, but the old man just keeps going, announcing that it's finally time to reveal his secret skill. He says he's been itching to test out this new ability to see exactly how much faster he's become, and he starts vibrating with this crazy energy. Noin can barely find the words, asking if the old man is actually serious about jumping into a fight with a monster like that, while the blue wolf leader just watches him. The wolf growls, warning them that even for a powerful pack like his, a wyvern is a life-or-death situation, and he asks the chief if he's just looking for a way to die. Noin starts sweating, asking if wyverns are really that big of a deal, and the wolf leader snaps back that it should be pretty obvious they are. Marulu looks up at Noin with a super worried face, but he just gives her a weak smile and tells her everything is totally fine. The two of them stand there together while Noin tries to play it cool, admitting he was just a little bit spooked by the whole thing. The village chief stands his ground and announces he's going to be the one to take down the wyvern. While Noin just watches him, Noin calls out to him, but the old man tells him to stay put and focus on keeping Marulu and the rest of the villagers safe. Noin tries to argue that he's got more skills for a fight like this, but the chief is already flexing and getting hyped up to move out. So Noin finally gives in and asks young Ark to run inside the house and grab his axe, and the kid takes off running immediately. Noin gives Marulu a reassuring smile, patting her head and telling her to just hang out with the chief while he handles things. It doesn't take long before Ark comes sprinting back with the heavy axe, shouting that he's got it. Noin takes the weapon and thanks the kid. He looks ready to get serious now. The blue wolf leader looks at him in total disbelief, asking if he's actually serious about jumping into the middle of this. The wolf says he might actually be strong enough to win, but Noin just laughs it off and tells him to stop being so nice. He admits it would be awesome if he had some crazy magic or special abilities, but since he's got nothing like that, he's just going to have to do it his way. Noin scratches the back of his head, looking a little stressed about the plan, and says he's just going to have to tackle the whole thing head-on since he doesn't have many options. But the blue wolf leader just stares at him, completely shocked and sweating, asking Noin if he's seriously not aware of what's happening. The wolf points out that Noin has been blessed by the gods so much that there's a crazy amount of power literally leaking out of his body like an aura. But Noin doesn't seem to notice at all. The wolf turns around and tells Noin to hop on his back because he's got the jumping power to get them where they need to be, saying that helping each other out is what their alliance is all about. Noin stops for a second, looking at the wolf like he's actually touched by the offer. He asks if the wolf is really okay with this since the whole pack will be risking their lives, but the wolf says he knew that from the start and is glad to do it to pay back his debt. The wolf adds that they don't really have a choice anyway, because there's no way they can win unless they jump up and get close to the enemy. So Noin climbs onto the wolf's back while Ark yells out his name from the sidelines, and Noin tells his new partner he definitely owes him one for this. Right as he settles in, a notification pops up saying he's gained a medium riding skill, and he can't believe he just unlocked another ability just by getting on the wolf. Marulu starts crying and screaming his name as they pull away, but Noin just tells her he's heading out while the chief tries to calm her down, saying Noin is going to finish this fight fast. Noin looks back one last time and tells the village chief to look after Marulu, adding that if things go south, the villagers should just team up with the wolves and run, turning his focus back to the fight. He tells the blue wolf leader it's time to move out. The wolf let out a growl and says he's ready to go. They charge in, but Noin can't help but notice the wyvern is way bigger up close than he thought it would be. As they dodge a massive swipe, the wolf checks if Noin is holding on okay, and Noin tells him he's doing fine. He knows that last hit would have been a disaster if it connected, so he keeps his guard up. He realizes he doesn't have any fancy magic or special moves, so this basic attack is his only shot, but he figures it should at least buy them some time. He asks the wolf if he can manage to get them positioned right above the wyvern. The wolf doesn't hesitate, saying that's easy work as he launches them high into the air. Noin braces himself, knowing everything depends on what he does from this spot. Noin tells the wolf that they've gone far enough and says to leave the rest of the fight to him. He gives a little smile and asks the wolf to take care of Marulu and the village if things go bad. With a huge jump, he launches himself off the wolf's back and high into the air while the wolf yells his name. Falling toward the monster, he thinks he probably tried to act a bit too cool for someone who was just a low-level porter. He remembers how Theta used to just wipe out enemies with magic, and he wishes he could have talked to her one more time. As he gets closer, he starts to think it's no use and that he's completely outmatched. He wonders if his old party actually just got tired of him always having to rely on their strength. If he's going down, he decides he at least wants to go out like a hero. But then he's caught totally off guard when the wyvern's head suddenly gets cut clean off. He just stares in disbelief as the massive head flies away, wondering how that even happened. Noin yells out in total shock as he watches the wyvern's head fly off. Barely believing what he's seeing, the blue wolf leader rushes over immediately and yells out to ask if Noin is okay. The wolf tells him that taking down a wyvern in a single hit is absolutely insane. Noin just looks at his hands and admits that honestly, the whole fight felt way too easy. They start moving past the massive body of the beast, and Noin mentions he's just glad they won, when he spots a glowing item that dropped from the monster and points it out. He says he's definitely not leaving that behind and reaches out to collect the loot back at the village. Everyone is going wild and yelling about how amazing Noin is. The village chief tells Noin it's time to have a massive feast to celebrate the victory, and Ark is right there cheering the loudest, shouting about how cool his big brother is for being a hero. Noin tells the group that riding the blue wolf into town is actually pretty embarrassing, so he asks them not to come down just yet. But the villagers are way too excited and start screaming for him to hurry up and bring the wolf down to see them. Marulu is already having the time of her life, barking like a pup while she rolls around in the thick, soft wolf fur, seeing how much fun she's having. One of the village girls points and asks Noin if she can pet the massive creatures too. Noin looks a little nervous but says it should be fine as long as she's gentle, then looks at the village chief for approval. The chief just scratches his head and agrees, even though he's clearly taken aback by how calm the monsters are, and he notes that everyone seems to be getting along just fine, even if Noin thinks the village is adapting a bit too fast. The chief says things are about to get pretty lively around the village, but then the wolf leader pipes up with a question. He looks almost shy as he asks if it's really okay for a pack of wolves like them to actually settle down in a human village, so Noin just gives him a big smile and tells him not to worry about it, because they're more than welcome to stay. Noin reminds the wolves about how they were kicked out of their home by that wyvern, and since their leader helped explain the situation, the village chief managed to convince everyone to let the pack move in, which actually makes the wolf boss burst into tears. It turns out Horripit village is tucked so far away in the mountains that outsiders hardly ever show up, so Noin gives a thumbs up and tells the pack they should be able to live here in peace, making the wolf boss feel even more grateful. He also mentions how Marulu has become really attached to them, so he really wants them to stay for her sake. The wolf boss gets all flustered, saying it's way too bold to suggest someone as important as Lady World Tree would care about them like that standing nearby. A few people start to wonder if Noin actually realizes who Marulu really is, because even though he treats her like any other normal kid in the village, he seems totally fine with the way things are going. It's possible Noin knows exactly what's happening and is just acting this way to keep her safe from the world, and he realizes that from now on, everyone is going to have to work together to protect the World Tree no matter what. A little girl from the village runs right up to the pack, happily offering a gift to the wolf leader. The big guy is completely caught off guard by the kid's energy, and she holds out a giant cob of corn with a huge smile. She thanks him for being a hero and keeping the village and her big brother Noin safe. Noin stands by and explains that it's just a small gift for taking down that wyvern earlier. The wolf boss is so touched by the gesture that he starts crying buckets, while Marulu cheers from the top of his head. The leader can't believe how nice these people are being, and the girl just keeps happily offering up the food. Looking out over the peaceful village and the windmill, Noin says they should all just focus on living a fun and relaxing life together from here on out. Meanwhile, deep in the woods, a hooded guy is scouting around. He takes a breath and realizes he's ended up in a seriously remote part of the land looking around at the trees. He notices there aren't any demons or monsters nearby. To anyone else, it would look like a totally normal forest, but he can feel something different. He senses a massive presence just a little further ahead and starts to wonder if the reincarnated world tree is actually hiding somewhere just beyond these trees. He keeps moving forward until he spots something interesting. He leaps up onto a large tree stump to get a better look at what's waiting for him. Carl leans down to inspect a nearby tree stump, noticing the cut is way too clean to be a normal job. Looking at the smooth surface, he starts wondering if a hero's sword was used here, or maybe something even crazier. He gets a serious look on his face, thinking there's no way this isn't connected to the world tree's reincarnation. Just as he's deep in thought, a girl's voice calls out from above, asking what he's up to, catching him totally off guard. The hooded girl just laughs it off, telling him she followed him in secret because he looked like he was doing something fun. She hops down from the branch as Carl asks how long she's been there. He can't believe he didn't even sense her nearby. Carl realizes it's expected from a 10 Shadow member assigned to the Archbishop, while she just brags about having a special skill for it. She gets right in his face to ask his opinion on the mission, but Carl just tells her to back off and give him some space. When she suggests they should try to be friends since they're both in the same group, Carl doesn't even hesitate to shut her down. She reminds him they're just mercenaries working for money anyway, but Carl just thinks about how much this girl ruins his focus. The hooded girl sits there pouting, complaining that being told to find the world tree's reincarnation is just asking way too much, making it clear she's not a fan of the job. She rants about how the Archbishop just dangles money and status over them, while Carl just stands there and sighs at her totally over the attitude she's giving. Carl looks her right in the eye and asks what other reason she could possibly have for joining the 10 Shadows besides the cash and the fame, but he doesn't wait for an answer. He starts walking off, saying the whole group is just full of fanatics, show-offs, or people looking for a payday, leading the girl to jump up in shock. She calls out after him, asking if that means he's only doing this for the money as well. Carl just gives a smug look, pointing out that she's the one looking down on the boss, and mentions the rumors about her having a total trash skill. She doesn't let it slide though, laughing as she brings up how he supposedly polished his own trash detection skill to climb the ranks. She says she only tagged along because of his success, and Carl just facepalms while she claps her hands. She keeps teasing him, saying she almost forgot how incredible his little skill really is, so Carl finally loses his patience. He tells her she's wasting his time and tells her to just get lost and leave him alone. He gets one last dig in before he goes, telling her that pretty face of hers is completely useless for any real stealth work. Carl completely loses his cool and swings his arm around, yelling at the girl to find out if she only showed up to mock him, making it clear he's at his limit. The hooded girl just gives him a playful wink and tells him to relax, claiming she was actually trying to pay him a compliment while she leans back comfortably. She tells Carl that if she had a face as good-looking as his, she'd definitely find a way to put it to better use, so she keeps the teasing going, suggesting he should use his looks as a weapon to charm people and gather intel. Carl just stands there with a shadow over his eyes, complaining that she's clearly just making fun of him with everything she's got, but he eventually lets out a tired sigh. He realizes that just sitting around and bickering isn't going to get them any closer to finding what they need, so he steps out onto a massive tree root to look over the area. He gets honest for a second and admits he's basically searching blind without even knowing what he's supposed to be looking for. And he explains that even if they are looking for the world tree's reincarnation, there is no real proof that a sacred tree would even bother taking a human shape, leading the hooded girl to shout out that he's finally getting the point. She looks pretty bored with the whole conversation, but Carl has had enough of her attitude. He starts walking away, telling her that if he's so useless, she should just go follow someone else who actually has some brains, but the girl just cheerfully agrees that his idea makes perfect sense. Carl stops in his tracks, totally blown away that she'd just agree that he's not the smartest guy for the job, right to his face. Carl watches as the girl waves from the trees. She says goodbye with a heart, leaving Carl wondering what's wrong with her. He stands there under the massive roots and sighs, thinking about how the 10 Shadows are all weirdos, but she's the worst. Carl starts to wonder if her being so likable is just a trick or part of her special ability, but he just shrugs it off, telling himself it doesn't matter because at least the nuisance is finally out of his hair. Carl keeps walking toward the light at the edge of the woods, thinking that once he's through, he'll find that massive power source. Back at the village, someone starts screaming for the chief and Noin, sounding like a total emergency. The chief and Noin both stop what they're doing. Noin catches the sound of a voice coming from deep in the forest. Suddenly, Ark comes stumbling out of the trees. He's gasping for help before he trips and face splints right in the dirt. Noin and the chief don't waste a second. They sprint over to him, shouting to find out what's going on. Ark reaches out a hand, looking absolutely terrified, while Noin keeps asking him what could have possibly happened.